Oh, hello, hello. Welcome once again, my fellow Wickers. We are here to talk about mental illness. It's another episode of WhickTV, a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. And today is kind of a serious show. It's something that I've been thinking about, that I've been talking about, that I've been rolling over in my head for a while. The uwu-ificaiton of mental illness. How we have allowed the least affected by mental illness to be the front and the face of advocacy, to lead the charge for the mentally ill. And I think that we have done a disservice through this, right? We have minimized the impact that mental illness has or can have on an individual and turned it into a cutesy-wootsy personality trait and quirk. Oh, look, I'm so quirky. Oh, look, I have autism, but it's the cute kind. I have ADHD, but it's the cute kind. And we have really made invisible the people who are who literally cannot function in society because they have these issues and others. I think the umbrella way we classify these things and how we've lumped everything under the same umbrella, again, has done a disservice to the people who need it most. We are failing them, and this is a topic that we deserve to talk about, that we need to talk about, because this is a very serious issue, despite, kind of the lighthearted way I might joke a little bit about it. It absolutely is something that is devastating families. It's devastating people, and it's something that we just are not addressing. But I want to take a moment to introduce my guest for this conversation, the person who really pushed for me to have this conversation publicly. Allison, tell people about you. Tell people who you are, what you do, why you're the person to talk about this, please.
Cool. My name's Allie or Allison, and I don't stream or anything. I'm very personally interested in psychiatry and its intersections with law and policy and culture. I'm not in the mental health field, okay? So this is not like a professional's take. I am in law school, so I am interested in that, but I'm not a lawyer. So again, no professional advice here. I'm just someone who likes to read about it. But basically, I believe that this country is failing the most severely and persistently mentally ill people by choosing to not aggressively prioritize them when policymaking. And instead, you get these really general initiatives to improve mental health in the general population, as opposed to fighting serious mental illness in the less than 5% of Americans who actually suffer from that. So serious mental illness is generally defined as a mental illness that significantly impairs functioning in at least one major life area. And major life area has a legal definition that's outlined in the Americans with Disabilities Act. Any mental illness just basically means DSM condition, and 1 out of 5 Americans have it. And half of those people have generalized anxiety alone. Okay, so a lot of, quote, mentally ill people for census purposes are very high functioning, arguably barely symptomatic people. And policy is written for them, whereas seriously mentally ill people, hundreds of thousands of seriously mentally ill people, are homeless or incarcerated in jails or prisons right now. And in every single state, a seriously mentally ill person is more likely to be incarcerated than hospitalized. So that's kind of where I'm coming from generally.
Yeah, are you I sent you a DM. You can answer that if you'd like.
Yes is the answer.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about your own struggles with mental illness? Why this is personal to you?
Yeah. So I am 26 right now, and when I was 21, my college sent me to a psych ward, and they told me I was having a manic episode with psychotic features. And I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 1, which used to just be called manic depression, okay? And I'm treatment responsive. It took several years and I wasn't always treatment compliant, but I have found medication that genuinely works for me and I have basically no side effects. So like my life is completely normal right now. Like I'm fine. So I'm not trying to like sob story, but people with schizophrenia, it's like even harder to treat than bipolar disorder. And there are a certain number of people with bipolar disorder that like are treatment non-responsive. So I mean, it was really scary, like being psychotic, being literally out of your mind. It's terrifying. Realizing that like you cannot trust your own head. Like you are literally delusional. You're literally like hallucinating, like auditory hallucinations, tactile hallucinations, like realizing that your mind is working against you. It's like very hard. And I mean, for a long time, I honestly didn't think I would come back from it. And I did, not because of some like personal attribute of mine, but because I had resources at my disposal. So I had like really amazing parents. They had great health insurance. Like I was really set up to succeed, and it was still extremely fucking difficult. So yeah, I'm all about making it easier for other people because I truly believe the difference between me, I'm about to graduate law school and I'm generally doing fine, and somebody who's like literally homeless and psychotic or like in jail or addicted to drugs. Like the difference is just like oftentimes resources and access to care.
So you talked a little bit about how 1 in 5 Americans are diagnosed with being mentally ill, right? They're technically considered mentally ill, but a vast majority of those, again, according to you, suffer just from generalized anxiety. How has that hurt access for resources to people who would be more like you, for lack of a better word, right?
So, 𝕵𝖎𝖎 is one of the he died in 2020 of cancer, but he was an amazing advocate for seriously mentally ill people. He helped get Kendra's law in New York passed, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But he said it best. He said, trying to secure funding for the mentally ill by promoting the most high functioning, like low symptom people is like trying to secure funding for starving children by only promoting the well fed. Like, these ads that are like, oh, the mentally ill are just like you and me. Like, when you talk about serious mental illness going untreated, that is straight up not true. And the needs of people with poor mental health, like with more mild psychiatric issues, who generally know that they are not well, these needs are very different from that of a person with like a serious psychotic disorder who oftentimes is suffering from impaired awareness of their own illness. So, by patting ourselves on the back as a society because we make it easier for somebody with mild anxiety to get help, like I don't think we should feel good about that when seriously mentally ill people are suffering the way that they are.
Yeah, it's let's talk about some of this, right? So I sent you an article the other day, on ADHD, basically. Do you remember that at all?
I remember the tweet. I don't remember the article, but I remember the tweet about the person who considered themselves somebody with very serious ADHD, and
Yes.
they were really
Yes.
frustrated with people that, yeah.
So how, like, people on the right wing especially talk about this as a social contagion, if you will, that this is being overblown. A lot of people are picking up the symptoms of some of these diseases, Tourette's, etc., but don't actually have them. That this is like a social contagion. How much weight do you give that argument, and why is it right? Why is it wrong? What do you think?
I definitely think they have a point. Like, even if it's not, I do believe that social contagion is a thing with certain psychiatric phenomenon, and I'll talk about that in a second. But even if it's just like, um, the definition of what is mental illness has like obviously expanded a lot since the publication of the DSM-5. And this is not just my opinion. A man named Alan Francis, who is a professor of psychiatry at Duke, and he was the assembler of the DSM-4. He's like one of the most public, like loud critics of the DSM-5 for psychopathologizing normal, unpleasant, but normal human experiences. So there are a lot of people that, I mean, it's not necessarily social contagion because they would have been suffering from it anyway, like even if they hadn't been socially exposed to it, but it's just being labeled as a psychiatric phenomenon when in years past it would have been labeled like normal human adversity.
Well,
But also,
why did they do that? What was the reasoning for them changing that from the DSM-4 to the DSM-5? Did they give a
There,
reason for why they expanded this definition?
well, there's like a benevolent reason and a cynical reason. Okay, which one do you want me to give first?
Let's go with the benevolent. Get the good faith and then the bad faith reason. Go ahead.
Okay, good faith reason is that there are people who were previously sub-threshold for diagnoses that could definitely benefit from psychiatric care. However, the odds of an insurance company covering your psychiatric care without a psychiatric diagnostic code next to your name is like about exactly 0%. So you have to be able to diagnose these people with fucking something, or else they just are like hung out to dry, basically. So that's like the benevolent argument, is that you're trying to make care more accessible to people. The cynical argument is that they are selling pills by selling ills. They are convincing more people that they are sick so that they can sell them the treatment.
Which do you tend to go for? Where do you put the weight of the argument based on your research?
I mean, well, I like to believe that the psychiatrists who wrote the DSM-5, I do honestly believe that they think that they're helping people. But I also
Okay.
do think that these pharmaceutical companies have taken advantage of like what Alan Francis calls diagnostic inflation, just like the bloating of all these criteria to include so many more people than they had previously.
But I mean, the argument is strong. There were people who were, again, on the cusp, on the threshold, who before the expansion didn't have access to treatment. And this access to treatment, wouldn't you agree that it has actually helped the lives of these individuals? How is that wrong? How is that bad? How is that harmful?
Well, it depends on what kind of treatment. So I definitely think that a lot of people with more mild issues could benefit from like forms of talk therapy. You know what I mean? Or, but like medication for the mildly mentally ill is the evidence base is nothing like medication for the seriously mentally ill. Like
Well, what do you
lithium
mean by
for,
that? Can you elaborate a little bit? Like,
yeah, I mean, like lithium for bipolar disorder and certain antipsychotics for schizophrenia have been proven to outperform sugar pills for like literally decades, like half a century in the case of lithium. Whereas like SSRIs to treat many forms of now diagnosable but previously undiagnosable depression have, from what I understand, like there just isn't that base to show that they outperform placebo.
interesting. So, in other words, the treatment being prescribed for the seriously mentally ill is also being prescribed for the less so. Is that what you're telling me right now, or am I misunderstanding?
I mean, antidepressants like are the first one that people point to and say
Okay.
that's overprescribed. In children, though, like the stuff I take a anti-epileptic drug and I take a antipsychotic drug, which some people would call neuroleptic tranquilizers. And I take that because I'm a woman of childbearing age and lithium is known to cause birth defects. And also, they just don't love to give lithium to younger people because younger people are more impulsive and you can very easily kill yourself with lithium. It's like having a loaded gun in your house. So it's not like the prescription, but with children, there are like the diagnosis of childhood bipolar disorder that like a lot of people don't believe that that should even exist. And there are these kids getting the same pills I take, and some of these pills have genuinely made me feel like a barred out zombie freak, and I can't imagine giving it to a 7-year-old. So, but in adults, it's mainly antidepressant drugs and anxiolytics, like anti-anxiety medications, and benzos. But benzos are almost entirely prescribed by primary care providers, and so are antidepressants. Like most of this overprescription issue actually isn't psychiatrists as much as it is primary care doctors. But like half of all U.S. counties don't have a psychiatrist, so it's a hard situation.
Damn, half of U.S. counties don't have a psychiatrist.
Indeed.
So how do these people get help?
A lot of times they don't, or they go to a primary care doctor. Telehealth, expansion of telehealth has been beneficial. We could still afford to do that more, but yeah, those are your options basically.
Okay, wow. I what you wanted to talk a little bit about policies with me, right? And the policies that are being put into place. You mentioned the one in New York, I believe. What was it called?
It's called Kendra's Law.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it is. It was named after a woman whose first name was Kendra, who was pushed onto the subway tracks and killed. She was pushed by a man who was untreated for schizophrenia, and he had actually attempted to secure psychiatric help the day before, and he was turned away. So Kendra's law is basically what they call an AOT law, assistant outpatient treatment. Opponents of this policy will say that's a euphemism. You're recommending involuntary outpatient commitment, which is true. It's an involuntary outpatient commitment law. So people who meet very narrow criteria, okay, the Treatment Advocacy Center estimates that it's literally less than 0.05% of adults who meet assistant outpatient treatment criteria. But the court can order outpatient psychiatric treatment. They can order you to take medication, but they cannot order the forcible administration of medication. And if you do not comply with the medication order, all that they can do is have you evaluated to see if you meet pre-existing inpatient admission criteria. So to qualify for AOT, you have to have had a certain number of arrests, violent incidents, or hospitalizations within the past time frame, generally 48 months. You have to have a serious mental illness that you're currently not being treated for, and you have to be unlikely to comply with treatment in the future. So that is an AOT law. It basically allows states to involuntarily commit a person on an outpatient basis.
Is that good or bad, in your opinion?
I think it's very good.
Do you think we should expand this?
Expand the criteria to be an AOT, or expand AOT programs where you have social workers and things going out into the community trying to target the people who are eligible for AOT and securing their basically entry into the system.
It sounds like you're more for one than the other, so maybe just from the way you frame them both. But
yes, I'm for an AOT program. Okay, so I think that the extremely narrow criteria is a good thing. Okay, but I am for, AOT requires lawyers, right? You have to be either a family member or a caregiver or a person in a certain career. So social workers would be allowed to, psychiatric nurses would be allowed to, but you have to be a certain type of person and you have to file a legal petition. And then there has to be a hearing. That person is entitled to representation. It's a whole legal process. And so having a program that helps facilitate it for families dealing with a seriously mentally ill loved one who are oftentimes strapped for resources anyway, that is great. Because an AOT law is only so good. If it's never enforced, if it's never taken advantage of, it's useless.
Much to do has been made about institutionalization. We got rid of a lot of our institutionalization laws and institutionalization policies back in the 80s with Reagan. But what we've seen isn't a reduction in mental illness. What we've seen is a reduction in treatment of mental illness and a massive expansion of incarceration of the mentally ill. Given that, would you be for rolling back some of the policies that or the re-implementation of some of the policies that Reagan got rid of?
So I don't even know how many policies were gotten rid of as much as beds were gotten rid of, because the main reason why we don't have psychiatric beds in state hospitals is actually because of a provision in Medicaid called the IMD exclusion. Stands for Institutions of Mental Disease, and it basically prevents states from being reimbursed for providing long-term psychiatric care to seriously mentally ill people. So if you're between the ages of 22 and 64 and you are being housed in a facility with more than 16 beds that's primarily targeted to psychiatric patients, states will not be reimbursed for your care through Medicaid. So many treatment advocates call this federally sanctioned discrimination against the seriously mentally ill, because people with other mental illnesses do not have these kinds of restrictions on care. But because of that, because states...
maybe I missed it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but just for my edification, you said that state sanctioned discrimination, right? And you said that's because these certain types of mental illness do not have the same protections as these other types of mental illness. Can you distinguish this for me? Because one of the problems I'm having in this conversation is we use the term mental illness, and I don't know what you mean by that. Are you talking about ADHD, or are you talking about schizophrenia? Right?
Yeah, no, I'm talking about seriously mentally ill people, people who would qualify for long-term inpatient psychiatric care. Yeah, so like a motherfucker with ADHD is not going to be put long term in an inpatient facility. Like it's not going to happen. So,
Fair enough.
but yeah, but it's basically again like because states can't be reimbursed for these people's care. Like it is expensive. It is exhaustive of resources to take care of seriously mentally ill people in a hospital setting. And if states aren't getting reimbursed for it, like they're just going to close the hospitals, and that's what they've done. So yeah, but I mean, there's this narrative about institutionalization. And by the way, the phenomenon of closing the hospitals and then mentally ill people just fill the jails and prisons, they actually call it trans-institutionalization because they're not actually being deinstitutionalized. They're just being shifted to a different institution that's arguably like way more cruel. Like it's very hard to be a seriously mentally ill person in a prison. Okay, like if you have a psychotic disorder, your symptoms are oftentimes strange, uncomfortable to be around, and like sometimes like
Hello?
likely
Oh
to
no.
get the shit beat.
You,
Oh
you're
wait, can you hear
you're
me?
you're you're breaking up. Can you repeat things? You mentioned you broke up at the point where you were saying that it's very hard to be mentally ill in the prison, and we lost you after that.
Okay, wait, can you hear me now?
Yes. So far so good.
Okay. So if you're seriously mentally ill in prison, like untreated seriously mentally ill people are very difficult to be around. Their symptoms are oftentimes like very strange. They make people seriously uncomfortable. Sometimes they can be just very offensive. Like if you have a serious mental illness and you're going untreated in a prison, you are way more likely to get the shit beaten out of you than people already are likely to get the shit beaten out of them in prison. Like it's and I mean they're way more likely to have to go into solitary confinement, right? Like there's no compassion in closing the hospitals, right? Like, in my opinion. And people will say the main argument is civil liberties, right? Like, if a person wants to just rot on the side of the road and think that the trees are talking to them, like that, they should be allowed to. They should be allowed to just sit in their own filth and think that people are possessed by demons. But, like, when your mental faculties are so compromised, you don't have any meaningful ability to exercise your civil rights. So by treating a person and restoring their sanity, we are actually like increasing their ability to exercise their civil rights, and that is the compassionate thing to do, in my opinion.
Even if they don't want it, even if they say no, I refuse. Because I've talked to certain people before who are deathly afraid of being in any kind of institution. Like they have in their lucid moments, right? Described to me like I would rather die than be put into institutionalization. Would you be for institutionalizing them when they're obviously not lucid, right? Even if that's been their express wishes?
Yeah, because I don't think that person has the capacity to deny treatment. I don't think that they are making a rational, like fully informed choice. Because even in your lucid moments when you're seriously mentally ill, you are not as insightful as you would be if you were sane. Like it's still not completely the person. And again, I'm talking about serious mental illness. Like the bulk of these people have schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Like there are other illnesses that can arise to the level of serious mental illness. So like there are people with OCD so bad that they can't leave the house because they think their stove is turned on. Like there are people with PTSD who are like literally mentally teleported back in time to Afghanistan when they got their leg blown off. Like there are people that don't have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia who still are seriously mentally ill and would be deserving of these funds. But the bulk of the
Oh no. Gang, is this me? Is this
say,
my internet that's doing this? I hope not. Um
um,
you
wait, did you lose me again?
we lost you again. I'm sorry. You were saying you were saying how people with PTSD are sometimes transported back, but the bulk of mentally ill are something, right?
The bulk of mentally ill people, like seriously mentally ill people, are going to have bipolar disorder type 1 or schizophrenia, which is to say they will have a psychotic disorder. Like, because bipolar disorder type 1, you can have manic episodes and you can descend into psychosis. And oftentimes, if you've been untreated for a long time, that is inevitably the result. So, when you are dealing with a psychotic person, a person like untreated, suffering from a psychotic disorder, you are not dealing with a person who, in my opinion, has the capacity to consent to refusing treatment, or to consent to refusing treatment, the capacity to refuse treatment when it's offered to them.
Interesting. So a couple things. Testicle Johnson for $5. I, for one, think that prison is probably not good for people's mental health. True. And Miss April Dawn, if we institutionalize all the mentally ill, who will watch Wick? Also a fair question. Also a fair question. Do you think you should have been institutionalized? Do you think that was fair of the college to do that to you?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was fucking crazy. Like, I was like, not, I mean, like, it would have happened inevitably. Like, if it wouldn't have been the college that sent me, like, I would have gone out in public and, like, probably been arrested for, like, disorderly conduct or something. Like, it would have inevitably happened.
Damn. The hard part of this, right, is that we have done institutionalization really, really bad in the past, right?
Absolutely,
60s,
yeah.
50s. I don't know if you've ever seen One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest, right? Like, the conditions in these places were abysmal. They were horrific. They were violations in many ways. And so how do you sell the public on more of this when that's been in the zeitgeist? That's our history with institutionalization. How do we get past that? How do we correct that and get people more on board? Because I don't know if people are on board, right, with institutionalizing the mentally ill. There doesn't seem to be any political will for it, right?
Well, when you say institutionalizing the mentally...
Oh, no, you did it again. Oh,
can you hear me?
Yeah, I said what you said when you say, and then you cut out.
Okay. When you say institutionalizing the mentally ill, I think people picture literally rounding up all the people who have ever been diagnosed with a mental illness on the streets and like putting them in a hospital forevermore. Like, no, you know what I mean? It's just making like psychiatric emergency services available for people who need them. And then people who don't need them, facilitating their reintegration into the community. So like, it's a lot less expensive, like a person with severe schizophrenia. It is better for everybody, the person with schizophrenia, society, the hospitals, everybody. It is much better for that person to live in supported housing than it is for them to live in a psychiatric ward, right? Like if we can get these people in group homes with live-in staff that help them, you know, a lot of people want this, right? Like not every single person is like an involuntary case, right? But those resources just aren't there. So nobody wants a return to the 60s. Like we had something like 700,000 people just in psychiatric hospitals indefinitely. Like that's insane. But currently we have less than 50,000. You know what I mean? And we're short like at least 96,000 psychiatric beds to just like satisfy the need for...
Oh, gang, I'm sorry about this. Yeah, we're having some real issues. Are you using your Ethernet? What's going on here? Are we on Wi-Fi? I don't even know.
I'm on Wi-Fi, but it's like good Wi-Fi.
It's not good Wi-Fi. It's not. But okay. Well, we're gonna make do. We're gonna get through this, gang. We're gonna get through this together. It'll be fun, right? You freeze at the most interesting moments, so you're like,
oh,
right? It's funny, but yeah, it's this idea, right? That well, let me give you my theory again. This is what I've observed as I've talked to people about this, as I've talked to others around me about this, both online and offline. You were right when you say that most people, when you say we need to institutionalize mental illness, think of their friend with ADHD or mild autism. But that is not who we are discussing, nor is it who we are talking about. And this is why I think that lumping these all together under the same category, which we have done, is a massive disservice to people. A massive disservice, because they are not the same thing. They do not have the same needs. They do not require the same amount of advocacy or the same type of advocacy. We have people who, again, the difference between not taking their pills is a less productive workday. And then you have people who, if they don't take their pills, will end up on the street, a danger to themselves and others. These are not the same type of people. And we are treating them, in many cases, publicly, through our advocacy as if they are. And it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy, gang. Also,
and that
go ahead, please.
the mental health industry supports doing that, for the record. Like SAMHSA, SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Am I still there? Do you still have me?
Yes.
Okay. So SAMHSA has some substance abuse org in it, and then it has CMHS, the Center for Mental Health Services. And if you look at the way they've spent their money, it's just like general social services that aren't in any way targeted towards seriously mentally ill people. And like SAMHSA released its strategic outlook for like a number of years. And people in Congress were like, hey, why doesn't this strategic outlook of yours for a number of years even mention schizophrenia? Like the word schizophrenia literally doesn't appear, nor does the word psychosis. Like, how come? And they will respond with, well, we feel responsible for the behavioral health of the entire nation. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, like that's a great question. It can literally, I swear, some of these definitions of mental health is just like being happy enough to achieve your full potential. It's like the most generic shit ever, where like literally anybody who's not feeling like 100% can reasonably claim that they're suffering from poor mental health. Like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Again, I have a theory as to why.
What's your theory?
I don't know. Again, this is a hypothetical, gang. This is not a hypothetical. It's a theory. It's a hypothesis. Sorry, it's a hypothesis I have. I don't know. I haven't done the actual research into this enough to be very certain of it, but it's a suspicion, because no one wants to listen to someone who is psychotic. The people who are able to have a voice are the people who are able to interact in society, right? And so the people pushing for changes that benefit them, right? Because these changes do benefit them. They massively benefit them. They massively benefit the high functioning people, the high functioning autist, the high functioning ADHD person. These changes are great for them. It's a godsend, right? They're the ones that are able to actually communicate what they want and what they need. And so they've taken the reins and they have decided to lead the ship, to guide the ship, and this is where the ship is going. But the problem is that their needs are not the needs of the people who have, again, bipolar type 1, schizophrenia, serious mental illness, serious PTSD, etc. And no one's speaking for them because, the high functioning mentally ill are getting theirs. So fuck them, right? And that's what's happening.
Well, and like these community mental health centers, like not state hospitals, but community mental health centers, they are literally incentivized to just only deal with people that have like mild depression, anxiety, ADHD, because they are a lot easier to treat than a person with schizophrenia who doesn't want to take their meds, right? They're a lot easier to be around. So, and these community mental health centers, when we like moved away from state hospitals and moved into them, there were no provisions put in place that these places had to accept seriously mentally ill people. So like Andrew Goldstein, the guy who pushed Kendra onto the subway tracks and got the New York AOT law about him, he went to a community mental health center and they said, you're a high needs patient. We don't have the resources to deal with you. And they turned him away. And then he killed someone the next day because he probably thought that she was like possessed or some shit. So it's really sad because the only people who advocate for the seriously mentally ill generally are family members of the seriously mentally ill. Because you're right, psychotic people are not great at political organization, okay? They're not awesome at lobbying. So it's generally like the parents of these people who have their mental faculties about them who will advocate, but there's so many more like high functioning psych patients than there are parents of seriously mentally ill people who have the time and ability to politically lobby. So it's very.
Oh, we lost you again. Oh, we'll get it, gang. We'll get it.
I swear, this
know.
isn't even my setup, and I'm supposed to be on Ethernet. By the way, I texted a person and they said I'm on Ethernet. So.
Yeah, I have no idea.
But where did you lose me? Because I actually want to say what I just said.
Repeat it all. Go for it.
The community mental health centers, like you said something like
Yeah,
Only the high
communities,
functioning.
mental health centers, they turned away this Kendrick guy, and that's how the law got passed, because they probably thought someone was possessed with demons, so they pushed him on a track.
Well, there's just like, if you are like a regional like mental health center, it's just a lot more like profitable and easy to deal with only high functioning patients. And there is no requirement that in order to receive like government funds that you have to take seriously mentally ill people. So that's like an immediate fix. Just condition
So
literally
that's
any
one
government
thing you would
funds.
advocate for, is that these community centers be both supplied with the resources as well as be required to accept high needs patients like that, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I can get behind
Um,
this. Go on.
yeah. Um, And I mean, frankly, like a lot of people who advocate more for the seriously mentally ill as opposed to people with just like general mental health issues, they actually will advocate for like, I mean, some of them, like the more radical ones, will advocate for completely disbanding SAMHSA and like reorganizing it entirely because that federal agency is so like lost to anti-psychiatry people. And that sounds crazy, but after this agency has like over 500 employees, not one psychiatrist. After a lot of like bitching and moaning by politicians, they appointed one psychiatrist.
Explain to my
She left.
audience, please explain to my audience what this is and why we should care about what it is, right?
Okay, so SAMHSA, the substance abuse and
So, oh no, Substance Abuse Administration, and then we lost her, gang. Substance
Substance
abuse.
Abuse and Mental Health Administration,
Okay.
SAMHSA. It's an
Mm-hmm.
agency of HHS, the Department for Health and Human Services. And it is the federal agency tasked with handling seriously mentally ill people, basically. And it is run by like very, here, right, sorry.
No, it's
I
okay.
can't
Just
multitask.
DM that to me. I DM'd you something, and we'll change your region based on your answer here, and hopefully that'll fix it.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Go on, please.
Wait, where was I? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just fixing that, and my admin's going to change the Discord region that we're in, and hopefully that'll fix the connection issues.
Oh no, you're
You
good.
were
I like
explaining what SAMHSA was. Why should we should care about it? What it actually does, or what its stated goals are, what its purpose is, and why we should care. Right? Go ahead.
okay. So stands for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. It's an agency of HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services. It is the federal agency tasked with handling seriously mentally ill people. And they basically deal out a lot of mental health block grants to states, and they condition those grants on programs that they deem are valuable, which are oftentimes like not like supported by evidence for seriously mentally ill people. But basically, like for one thing, SAMHSA has a very strong anti psychiatry basis. So there are people who believe that mental illnesses are like, at least with serious mental illnesses, that there's something like brain diseases, that there is something biochemical going on, that there is something materially real going on, even if we don't know it yet. There are other people, oftentimes very progressive, like disability rights advocates, who will frame mental illness as like a sociological issue. And if we could just fix all of society's ills, people wouldn't descend into mental illness. And this is kind of.
Can you give us an example of this of an advocate for this, as well as a type of advocacy that they're doing? When you talk about the people who are advocating that mental illness has a sociological basis, and if we just fix the sociological problems, they would go away.
A lot of times they advocate for more of a recovery model of mental illness as opposed to a medical model. So, medical model prioritizes things like getting psych meds to seriously mentally ill people, availability of ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, which actually has a very robust evidence base for treatment resistant major depression and bipolar depression. Basically, medical model prioritizes psychiatric access. Recovery model is more about patient directed. They don't use patient. They use person with lived experience, directed care, and autonomy is most important. And so the person with the mental illness telling you what they want to do, that's most important. And also, quote unquote, peer support. Peer support is literally a program. It's kind of modeled based off of like Alcoholics Anonymous and the sponsor system, where literally a person with mental illness is like assigned to another person that's like more mentally ill than they are, and they like hang out, and like one mentally ill person will call the other mentally ill person about their progress. Like, it's not supported by evidence, but SAMHSA just pours funding into it.
You're fucking with me.
No, I'm not fucking with you. Look up peer support.
With me.
Peer support. They're doing That's what it's called.
They're saying, hey, yo, guy with schizophrenia, here's this guy with worse schizophrenia. Good luck. Is that what they're doing?
I mean, that is what peer support is. Like, that is what peer support is, and it makes any single program, like, for instance, ACT stands for Assertive
This
Community
sounds made
Treatment.
up. Can you give me
It sounds
links?
made up.
It sounds made
Yes.
up. I think you're making this up right now. I'm not going to lie.
That's fair. I'm just typing in SAMHSA peer support.
Get you in there. Put it in my chat, too, because I'm sure my chats want to see YouTube chat, Twitch chat, Kick chat. That sounds wild to me.
All right, I'm going to send this to you, and then I'll let you put it in chats. Let me actually make sure that this link is relevant. Peer support workers are people who have been successful in the recovery process who help others experiencing similar situations. Through shared understanding, respect, and mutual empowerment, peer support workers help people become and stay engaged in the recovery process and reduce the likelihood of relapse. So, people who have been successful in the recovery process who help others experiencing similar situations. Like, that's like a very euphemistic way of saying people who have been acutely mentally ill before, but who aren't acutely mentally ill right now, dealing with acutely mentally ill people. And also, their definition of recovery is bullshit. It's not like a return to health, like a remission of psychotic symptoms. It's like feeling good, subjectively feeling good. And they have all these like useless measures, like feeling of hopeless or hopefulness, feeling of hopefulness, that they will measure, and they'll be like, see, they subjectively report increased hopefulness. But what they can't prove is that arrests are reduced, that homelessness is reduced, that hospitalizations or suicide is reduced. So it's really like, I don't know, the link I sent you is just like the basics of peer support. But Mental Illness Policy Org is a nonprofit that was run by 𝕵𝖎, and he has like a ton of like studies and systematic reviews where they basically tried so hard to prove that peer support works, and they can't do it. Like, it's not there. And they'll acknowledge like the paucity of evidence every now and then. SAMHSA, they'll say something like, there's a paucity of evidence, but the lived experience of our consumers, which mental health consumers is another like PC way to say psych patient, basically. They will say the lived experience of our consumers attests to the value of peer support. Like, it's actually stupid. And a peer support program makes everything more expensive because they pay these peers. These peers get paid. So if you're going to have like a mobile treatment team, for instance, like a crisis intervention team that goes to the house of a seriously mentally ill person when they are like in crisis, and you add a peer to that team, it's just like more money. Like, it's seriously like hundreds of millions of dollars that gets poured into peer support. And they can't prove it works.
What could that money be going into instead that you think would be a better use of it?
AOT programs, for one thing. Facilitating the like people taking advantage of an involuntary outpatient commitment program, and supported housing. Okay, so more group homes where like a psychiatric professional or like a social worker lives there full time. Make sure that nobody needs to get evaluated for inpatient criteria. Make sure that everybody's filling out their paperwork so that they get like Medicaid benefits and can afford their medication. Like, yeah, supported housing, AOT programs, not peer support.
Okay. That's, yeah, no, so basically AOT being institution, right? Institutionalization?
Outpatient commitment. Outpatient commitment. So you live in the community. You live in the community wherever you want, but you have to see a doctor every number of weeks.
Seems reasonable. right?
Seems extremely reasonable, doesn't it? I would argue that it is very extremely reasonable.
Now,
The ACLU would
does that
disagree.
have evidence-based backing, though, to work, to
Yes.
reduce all the metrics you mentioned, to reduce homelessness, reduce arrests, reduce relapse, as you say, the other metrics you mentioned? Is there evidence-based backing for
Modern
that?
studies out of New York, California, and a number of other American states have shown like very significant decreases in hospitalization, violence, suicide attempts, and things. There was one study from the pilot program at Bellevue Hospital, one hospital in New York, and it was like a primitive version of AOT. And that one study didn't show great outcomes. This was before a lot of the modern laws were even passed, right? But it was reported in the Lancet, which is a very like reputable psychiatric journal. And so organizations like the ACLU, like Mad in America, these like very people who consider psychiatric treatment to be torture, they will cite this one fucking study from like the 90s or even maybe the 80s, and they'll be like, see, AOT doesn't work. But seriously, like I will link you the page on mentalillnesspolicy.org where they just have studies and studies on AOT because that is actually supported by evidence.
Okay, we'll check it out. I'll put these in my Discord as well. If you could add them to my Discord. So, gang, if you want to see these for yourselves, go to my Discord. Check them out there. Don't take her word for it. Don't take my word for it.
Don't take my word for it.
Look at the studies. Look at the studies. And we'll see how that goes. Why the pushback against this then? Like, if there's evidence, right? Why would the ACLU, why would these other organizations push back against this?
Like, they consider it like infringing upon a person's autonomy, which it kind of is, right? I mean, it's not kind of is. It literally is. It's involuntary outpatient commitment. And it's just the view that like the maximization of choice is always best, even if it leads to some ugly results, right? That you would always rather a person have the choice. And if they end up in a prison, well, you know, at least they had the choice. Like, it really is just a belief that autonomy prevails, even when a person is lost to madness.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I guess I'd ask you, right? So you mentioned that some of the more extreme people want to dismantle the SAMHSA, right? What do you want with regards to this? What are
either
your
a
thoughts?
complete rehaul of SAMHSA where like respected psychiatrists who believe in their field are employed. Okay, so MDs, right? Medical doctors, where they have a huge role. And also, I would like criminal justice people involved as well, like people who advocate for the seriously mentally ill. Like, okay, so actually, the policies I support, like AOT, these things, they are very highly supported by cops. So some people dislike that, right? They say, oh, cops like what you're doing. Like, obviously it's bad, but cops, like, they don't love dealing with seriously mentally ill people. They would rather these people be in a hospital than in their jails, right? Like, National Sheriff's Association, International Association of Chiefs of Police, like, they've all supported, and so has the Department of Justice, like, supported AOT programs. But something like 20 to 40% of calls in like basically every American jurisdiction involve seriously mentally ill people. Like, cops are arguably like frontline psychiatric workers in this country, unfortunately. So I do think that they should be represented on like policymaking teams.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, this is a lot. This is a lot. There's some responses in my chat, right? Everybody I know who's gone to a psych ward says it's made them worse.
I mean, if you don't need to go to a psych ward and you're put in, it will probably make you worse, right? Like, and that sucks. But also, like, I mean, depending on how mentally ill they are, like, sometimes mentally ill people aren't the best at knowing, like, what did and didn't work for them. Like,
what do you mean by that? Can you explain?
Like, whenever people are mentally ill, like, if they get better, either because their condition is episodic and the episode ended, or because they're like remit, right? Like, their mental illness like actually ends. Not everybody's mental illness is chronic, right? Not everybody will be mentally ill forever. And when people get better, they will oftentimes like internally attribute whatever they were doing at the time as to like the cause of their recovery, right? So like maybe somebody picks up yoga at the same time they see a remission of symptoms and they're like, yoga literally solved my mental illness. I didn't need the psych ward. I just needed to stretch. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I explained that super well, but yeah.
I explained it well
And
enough for
also,
me. I get you, but go on.
I mean, inpatient commitment is like not preferred, right? Like you would always prefer a person be seen on an outpatient basis. You would always prefer a person live in supported housing over a psych ward, right? Like both because it does maximize freedom and also it is less expensive. So it's like, yeah, like I'm not trying to get mildly mentally ill people locked up in wards forever.
Well, what do you say to the concern that if you expand these programs, right, if you normalize this kind of behavior, that families who just don't want to deal with you anymore, who otherwise you would be responsive to these outpatient cares, outpatient treatments, if you had a supportive family, would instead just say, you know what, we really don't want to deal with this, and just lock them up, right? Just send them to the institution. We're good. We don't want to support them anymore.
I mean, a person could only be involuntarily committed inpatient for as long as they met inpatient criteria, which in basically every state is a danger to the self or others. Now, some states interpret danger to self or others more broadly. So some states will include grave disability in danger to self or others. Other states require you to basically be imminently violent, right? But if a person has a serious mental illness but they're not a danger to the self or others, like they can't just be kept in a ward. Like there are plenty of administrative remedies to get those people out, right?
Such as?
I mean, you're entitled to certain hearings, and arguably, it's like sometimes, which I wouldn't be in favor of, like reducing this, right? But arguably, it is sometimes too easy for certain people to get out of psychiatric wards because these administrative hearings are held to a standard of criminal procedure. So, like, criminal evidentiary rules apply. So, like, the prohibition of character evidence applies. So, oftentimes, past behavior is not admissible. So the fact that a person is acutely psychotic and goes off their meds within like 48 hours, literally every single time they're released, and then they end up homeless is not admissible in some of these proceedings. Like you just can't say it. So, I mean, there are like, you can call for an administrative hearing basically any time to like make the psychiatric hospital prove by a clear and convincing evidence standard to prove that you still fulfill inpatient criteria. And if you're being involuntarily committed, you are entitled to legal representation. So
Interesting. Okay. But don't you see the kind of incentive that comes into play, kind of an insidious incentive, if we fund these programs more, right? Like we start paying, like the hospital, you got 50 beds for these people, 50 rooms. Okay. If you fill them all up, you get the money. And then aren't they incentivized to just keep people there because they keep making money? As longer they're there, the more money they make. Isn't there this kind of perverse incentive at play here?
I mean, maybe if you had like way too fucking many beds, right? If you had all these empty beds just sitting around, but that's like just not the reality in this country. Like, there's some quote by like some psychiatric nurse that's like a big advocate, and she's like, people occasionally have a mildly hard time getting out of a psych ward nowadays. Everybody has a hard time getting into one. Like, it's way more likely that nurses have to forcibly discharge a person who wants to stay in treatment. That is a far more likely scenario because they have to make room for people who are actually imminently dangerous. That's far more likely than a person who is in no way a danger to the self or others, in no way gravely disabled, and they're just there and they have no remedy. Like, that's like a cultural idea that we have, right? But it's not like with the bed shortage we have, it's just nowhere near reality. And I feel like you would have to increase the bed supply by like 50-fold to get to where that incentive even exists, right? Because there are just so many people trying to get into psych wards that can't. Like trying to get in. They want to get in, right? They know that they're sick and they want to get in and the beds aren't there. Like, so I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that does answer it. That does answer it. Let's transition a little bit, if you don't mind, to also include kind of TikTok and social media and the effect that social media and social media advocacy and social media quote unquote representation has had on this discussion, has had on the mentally ill, and has had on people's perceptions of the mentally ill. I guess first question, overall positive or overall negative?
Very negative, resoundingly negative. 10 out of 10 bad.
Elaborate.
I think that like basically every mental illness in the DSM has its own online community. Okay, if you know where to look, you can find like, I mean, even I'll use bipolar disorder as an example. Like, there's a bipolar Reddit. There, if you go to hashtag bipolar on any website, like there will be like a community of people who have bipolar disorder, and they're like all talking about it literally every day, all the time. And like, I feel like a lot of these online communities, they kind of just like encourage self-destructive activities, right? They're very, very resentful of anything that even kind of sounds like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, which like sometimes when you're mentally ill, you have to do, right? Like sometimes people are beyond that and they have no bootstraps to pull up, like acutely psychotic individuals. But like, these online communities, they encourage people to like identify with their diagnoses a lot more than I think anybody should, right? Like, your psychiatric illness that you've been diagnosed with should be the least interesting thing about you. It should not be viewed as a personality trait, right? It should not be a core part of your identity. I think these social media communities where people go online, they make friends, that it's all they talk about, like, it's really bad. And then also there are socially contagious illnesses. Like, great example right now is the dissociative identity disorder comeback, and TikTok tics. Okay, so TikTok Tourette's, where like oftentimes teenage girls will start displaying symptoms of Tourette's, which is diagnosed in childhood. That is a disorder that manifests in childhood. Okay, you don't get Tourette's as a teenager, right? Like, this is something different happening, and it's just really interesting. They've even floated like diagnosing these girls with mild neurocognitive disorder, which was originally branded as like early onset dementia, because they're like, we don't know what to fucking call this because it's literally not Tourette's and it looks just like it, but like they need therapy, like something's going wrong. Look up TikTok tics. I'm telling you, that shit is so spicy.
So spicy. Okay, interesting. But you mentioned that these people do need treatment though, right? So should we not get them treatment that they need?
The type of treatment you would need if you have like socially contagious pseudo Tourette's, that is different from like the therapies that people with Tourette's would need, right? Like, so maybe they need therapy to develop a healthy sense of identity so that they don't unconsciously grasp onto these mental illnesses to have something. You know what I mean? But like, that's very different from what people with like the original like concept of these disorders need.
I see. Has there been any positive impact from social media and from how that has dealt with mental illness? One that comes to mind is perhaps awareness. I am much more aware of many more mental disorders than I ever was before I went online, right? Like, I have met and interacted with so many mentally ill people, for good and ill, right? That I never would have interacted with outside. And it does help me understand some of the struggles that they go through. That is a benefit, no doubt, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely individual cases of people who have these disorders who maybe realized that they needed to look at certain things and maybe realized that they needed to seek help where they wouldn't have before, right? That also can be a double-edged sword because you get people who are basically well seeking help. But there are definitely people who have like mental illness that have been helped by increased visibility on social media platforms. And there are almost certainly people who do not have mental illness, but who have gained a new sort of sympathy or like empathy with the condition. But I think way, way more so, it has developed like an unhealthy cultural relationship we have with these diagnostic labels. And I do think they kind of encourage people to stay symptomatic, right? Like, even if like in these bipolar spaces, like, you will get more social media engagement talking about how sick you are versus like talking about how you're doing better, right? Like, the long emo posts about how hard it is to like be in a major depressive episode or like be manic, like those get way more engagement than posts about just like, I'm doing fine, I'm still taking my meds and I'm doing fine. Like you are rewarded like on an endorphin level, like when you engage with social media a lot about your mental illness, like you are like neurochemically rewarded for being symptomatic. It's this weird, I don't know. I think it does a lot more harm to mentally ill people who get stuck in these like ruts because they find
Yes.
these communities, and that's just, and also
So
I do think a lot of people see what mental illness is presented as online and they're like, oh, that's the least sympathetic shit ever. Like I don't give a fuck about these people.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, you mentioned that you struggled like with mental illness, right? And I don't mean to repeat it, but yeah, you've been institutionalized. You have bipolar disorder type 1, etc. You're currently medicated and things like that. Have you interacted with these I guess groups, the social media? How has social media influenced you personally, either positive or negative on this?
Okay, two levels. So one, when I stopped engaging with like mental health advocacy social media is I was super depressed and I kept getting posts about how it's okay to be depressed. I was like, it's not okay. It's like not okay. I don't get anything done. I'm like failing classes and shit. It's like literally not okay. Like telling me that my depression is valid is fucking unhelpful. You know what I mean? So there's that. But also like I used to engage more in, and this isn't explicitly a mental illness community, but the T is that it oftentimes is, the Me Too, like sexual violence survivor community. Okay. That shit was really unhelpful, right? Like talk about like incentivizing people to stay unwell and like ruminate on their experience. Like I know that's not the intention of these people in these communities, right? But I do think it's the effect.
Really? Okay.
Mm.
Fair enough. So how do we fix that?
Um, I honestly think it is just like more honesty, like from the psychiatric field about what mental illness is and isn't, and also like psychiatric professionals know that people are developing unhealthy relationships with their mental illnesses through social media. Like I was sent inpatient when I got diagnosed, but since then I have done partial hospitalization, which is like intensive outpatient. So it's when you go to a hospital for like 8 hours a day and then go home. I've done that once. And it was like a 2-week program, and they spent half of a whole day talking about how to not develop an unhealthy relationship with your diagnostic label and how to not let it define you and how to not make it a core part of your identity. Like, psychiatrists know that people are doing this, right? Like, and I think they need to talk more openly about it. Like, they need to go on the
Why don't
news.
they?
They need to I mean, if you criticize the field, like you're not going to get invited to be a part of the next DSM, right? If you're like a high profile like psychiatrist who teaches at a really reputable university and you start talking about how the field is fucked and like going in certain like really problematic directions, like you're just probably not going to rise ranks as quickly. Like Alan Francis, he's basically like a psychiatric pariah now. You know what I mean? He's still really well respected, right? But that's because he did all of his shit in his career before he started speaking out. Like, if he wouldn't have had the resume that he did whenever he started speaking out, he probably would have just gotten like thrown away as like a random like grifter trying to like make a name for himself by criticizing psychiatry. Like, it just, I don't know, the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, like the people in power there do not seem too receptive to criticism.
I mean, that's fair, right? But what would you say to the people who are saying, "Oh, this is just your experience. My experience has been great. I have improved greatly. These mental health advocacy groups, the Reddits, the TikToks and stuff has actually helped me." Like, what would you say to that?
First, I would ask them what they have, because I mean, if you have like, no offense, but if you don't have like a serious mental illness, it's not that I don't care about you, but I'm not too concerned about your testimony, right? Like my priority is helping seriously mentally ill people get treated.
Ginger, thanks for the kicks up, gang. I really appreciate it. But go on.
So I would ask them what they have. if they say they have a serious mental illness and they swear that they still got better with all the advocacy.
What do you mean by serious mental illness? Like, I know we keep saying mental illness. Like, so, and you mentioned if they don't have a serious one, you don't care about it. Can you be more specific on what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, basically, colloquially, it's basically just like mental illness rising to the level of present disability. So again, the vast majority of these people will be schizophrenic or bipolar type 1, but not all of them. There are people with certain cases of OCD and PTSD and like definitely major depression who also count. But basically, people who cannot take care of themselves in basic ways, like people who are literally detached from reality, of course, like people who are, losing jobs, not leaving their house, and not losing jobs for like normal reasons, like losing jobs because they are like talking to the walls and shit. Like their behavior is like not compatible with a workplace, like because of their mental illness. Like that's what I mean by serious mental illness. Most of the times it's just referring to schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, but it is not exclusive to those labels.
Do you think that maybe this is also part of the problem of the most high functioning, the most the least affected by mental illness, right, are the ones leading the charge? It very much could be the case that people with mild autism, mild ADHD, mild other symptoms and things like that, mild bipolar disorder, etc., mild OTCD, are actually helped by these groups, right? Are actually, their health is improved, their awareness is improved, it actually benefits them. But from what you are saying, this is at the expense, at least according to you, of the people with a lot of low functioning abilities and diagnoses and conditions. And so while it does help the person with ADHD, the person with schizophrenia is actively hurt by these things.
Yeah, like I think a lot of like mildly mentally ill people, like there is this perception that your psychiatric illness is just a different way of thinking. It's not necessarily bad. It just makes you different, which is like obviously extremely unproductive if you have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And bipolar disorder and schizophrenic people, like they are very vulnerable to that kind of thought that like, oh, I'm not mentally ill, man. I'm just like seeing shit on a different level. Like, yeah, I do think that encouraging people to like get comfortable with their symptoms and like don't feel too bad about yourself even though you have this illness. Like if you have a serious illness, like you're gonna have to feel kind of bad for like a certain amount of time, right? Like it can't just be this like happy cushy thing. You'll never get better.
Okay, fair enough. What would you advise people watching this, right, who have loved ones? Maybe they're suffering from some sort of issue, right? Maybe their family member is. Maybe they have an uncle, a cousin, a brother, a sister, a mom or dad, even a child that has serious, debilitating mental illness. What would you suggest for these people both in your experience and in your research?
Well, if you think they would qualify for an AOT program, as I described, then definitely look into that. Okay. If they've been hospitalized or arrested a certain number of times within the past while and they won't take their medication, like definitely look into AOT. Okay. This is kind of like a random. There's this book called An Unquiet Mind by Dr. 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙, and I swear I probably wouldn't be on medication if I hadn't read this book. She is the co-director of the mood disorder clinic at Johns Hopkins, and she has manic depression herself, has bipolar disorder type 1 herself. She's written several like really high profile, like literally psychiatric textbooks on bipolar disorder, and she had mountains of research behind her before she even like was revealed to have bipolar disorder to her colleagues. Because like back in the 90s, like a woman with manic depression is not going to be allowed like to work as a psychiatrist, right? She had to hide that, and she got tenured and like had all this shit published, and then she tried to kill herself with lithium. So this book, An Unquiet Mind, it's really like it is the perspective of both the patient and the practitioner in one book. and it's fucking amazing. And if you have a seriously mentally ill person who will not take medication and they don't qualify for AOT or something like that, I seriously recommend reading that book. And psychoeducation, basically, just like learning about the serious mental illness that your loved one has and just learning as much as you can about it, and then also helping to empower them to learn more about it. Because insight into one's illness is one of the best predictors of whether or not you will recover.
Speaking of the mentally ill, 𝕍𝖎, thank you for the raid. 72 new wickers in chat. Sit down, kick up your feet, and we are learning how social media and how SAMHSA and some of these other programs are actively hurting seriously mentally ill people. But please, continue.
I mean, that's mainly it. Like, if you have an involuntary commitment program, like outpatient, okay, obviously, like living in the community is preferable, right? If you have that at your disposal, take advantage of it. If not, like, really just try to maximize your education of the illness. And I honestly recommend, like, rather than like going to Google and typing in bipolar disorder, like, there are psychiatric textbooks that you can find online for free and like read what the doctors say about it. You know what I mean? Or go to Google Scholar and read what like psychiatric journals are publishing about it if you can, right?
What would be
there's
the
just
difference?
a lot of
why can't I just Google it? Like, what will I see that's gonna be misinformation, or in your opinion, right?
I mean, not so much misinformation as just like not all information is provided, right? Like sometimes a lot of information sheets about serious mental illness are put out by nonprofit organizations related to serious mental illness. Some of these are more honest than others. Like some nonprofit organizations kind of seem to prioritize like minimizing stigma as opposed to conveying fully accurate and like bluntly honest information. You know what I mean? So they will kind of like sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they will kind of like water down the nature of the illness. So if you want like really straightforward takes, I would go to the psychiatric like primary sources.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure where to go from here. I think we've covered the bases. We do have a lot more people in here, so and I was kind of disgusted with the SAMHSA stuff. So I know that the people who've been here the whole time might find this boring to repeat, but I think it bears repeating now that we have a lot more guests with us. Why is SAMHSA crap? Please. And we are going to do call-ins. So if you're listening to this and you have a different experience or you want to say something different, get backstage and we'll start pulling you in after our guest here repeats the SAMHSA. Why SAMHSA is wrong and bad. Go ahead.
Yeah, so SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, Department of Health and Human Services. It contains the Center for Mental Health Services, CMHS, and I swear it sounds crazy, but it has like an enormous anti-psychiatry bias. So it has an enormous bias towards the belief that if we could just solve sociologic ills, that we would solve mental illnesses. You know what I mean? And you see a lot of funds distributed to more recovery model programs as opposed to medical model programs. And recovery model prioritizes things like peer support, which Wick didn't believe me, but it is literally true that peer support is about finding mentally ill people who have like recovered, right? So they're not acutely symptomatic, and adding them onto the treatment team of an acutely mentally ill person. So this is not proven to work, right? It's like not shown that a team with peers, is what they call them, peers, that a team with peers outperforms a team with only professionals. That's not shown to work, and it makes every single program more expensive because these mental health peers get paid. So it's just an enormous waste of resources. They hired one psychiatrist finally. Like, it was an agency of over 500 people dealing with mentally ill people.
They literally have no psychiatrists, no professionals in this. Yeah.
No, they hired one psychiatrist, and she left after 2 years. She left after 2 years, and she published an article in Psychiatric Times about the anti-psychiatry bias in SAMHSA, and she said that there was a palpable like disdain for psychiatric medicine. And there was even somebody who told her that psychosis was just a different way of thinking during times of stress. Like, that is a quote that she put in this Psychiatric Times article, which I will now try to find for you.
Yeah, this is
But
literally conspiratorial, like anti-vax kind of level bullshit. If what you're saying is accurate,
and it's not like, okay, Republicans have criticized SAMHSA waste a lot, but Democrats have done it too. Like, every single bill to reform SAMHSA has been sponsored by both a Republican and a Democrat. So it's a bipartisan thing, but I'm looking for her Psychiatric Times article.
Please do. Please post that in my chats, post my general chats. But okay, let me start to bring on some of the guests, if that's okay. Are you ready for this? There's
Perfectly
some bad
fine.
people in my chat saying that you're full of shit, that they know better than the psychiatrists, and I'm curious what they have to say. So please, if you think you know better than psychiatric journals and medicine, come give us your Twitter takes. We'd love to hear them. Hello, what you got? You're muted on your end.
Hello.
Oh, there you are. What's up?
I was just jumping in. I saw something that I think is really interesting. Part of my background is I've worked in mental health for most of my adult life, if not all of my adult life. And I think it's really interesting that a lot of people are against the concept of institutionalization. Like you guys were chatting about a little bit earlier, like historical precedent for psychiatric involuntary institution is like really scary, right? Like the idea that somebody can be a little crazy, a little delulu, and then this person is like involuntarily detained, like against their will, and getting out is harder. I was coming on just to back up what was talked about previously, like the idea that there is a huge deficit of psychiatric care in the United States specifically, where the deficit of beds itself does not lend for a profit-driven model like a lot of people think. And within that, the idea that there are, in fact, people in society who are dangerous to themselves and others and do need to be stabilized in an inpatient facility. And anybody who is kind of the belief that this is like a denial of their rights. You guys were talking earlier about the case about the guy who pushed that other guy out of the subway trains, got out, and then the next day killed somebody else. We're talking about impacting a greater society where there are people that are at risk, either like interpersonally, like if you have a family member who is delusional or violent or experiencing psychosis, that detaining these people is actually like paramount to keep not only them safe from themselves and keep other people safe as well. I just wanted to come in and say, based and true.
Okay, well, thank you for coming to say that. Is there anything else you want to share before we let you go? Any other invites? You say you've worked in this field. May I ask in what capacity?
I don't really like to talk a ton about work, but I've worked in inpatient facilities and I've worked in outpatient facilities. I've also done in-home care and community care as well. But the big difference is I agree a lot with what was said earlier, that the people that are representations, especially online, for a lot of significant mental illnesses, are people that would be quote unquote on the high functioning end of the scale, right? So you see people who are well adjusted, who are able to go to work, who are able to have interpersonal relationships and integrate well into society. The problem, specifically with people that are lower functioning, are those are the people that do get thrown under the bus. And working in inpatient facilities, you see this for sure, that their advocacy stops when their ability to advocate for themselves does, essentially, right? It's up to the families and the parents and the people that are in like the direct line of fire of these people, including themselves, really to kind of discern what is appropriate for their safety and the safety of others as well. I just think it's an interesting conversation because people will see people, you know, on like Facebook or TikTok or Twitter or whatever, that are able to integrate well, but they don't see people who are like actually very dangerous to themselves and other people. And those are the people that need these services the most. It's not, you know, just somebody has a little bit of dyslexia, we better lock them up and get that under control. It's people that need that management and that stabilization before they can even begin to look at other resources to reintegrate back into the community, right?
Beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Sure,
Thank you for sharing, and we'll see you later, buddy. Based.
I was excited. I knew that person had like experience in the psychiatric field, so I was really excited when I saw him pop up.
Great. Excellent. Let's bring in the next person. Testy, what you got?
Hello? Good.
Hello.
Volume.
Yeah, your volume's low. Turn it up.
How's this? I'm like leaning right into my mic.
I'll turn it up for you. Hold on.
Yeah. You're a shitty mic. I apologize.
Okay, your mic is shitty.
Well, I don't think I can follow that. Like, I jumped in, and I mean, that was very well put by that dude. but he did kind of skip the line, so I'm gonna look like even twice as dumb now. But no, I this was actually like a very good talk. I think Allison knows her shit, and I found it informative. Just touching on like this uwu-ificaiton of like mental health. I have an issue with the term neurodivergent, and I haven't heard it brought up, but it's like a personal pet peeve of mine because it's gaining a little bit of traction, but it's not a psychiatric term. And neurodivergent stands in contrast to somebody being neurotypical, which I believe actually came out of like some like I don't know autistic community, which is not being hyperbolic. It's it's like actual like. But anyway, yeah, it's a vague term. It's not a diagnosis. It doesn't point to anything in particular. Like it's one of those things I think Allison touched on with this SAMHSA or whatever. Sort of this widening and broadening of categories. Of like everyone's neurodivergent, you know, we're all special in our own ways, but it deals a little bit more with like the behavioral aspects of kind of like, you know, those things where how much of it is like is pathologized versus how much of this is just like society's expectations of people, right? So I think there's a little bit of value in that in terms of what might be like considered to be normal behavior. But yeah, I don't know. That's all I really had. A lot of these things, they're like lifelong things. There is no like, you know, there's no put a bow on it and you're cured, right? Like a lot of this is just like managing these things. It's not, yeah. So anyway, that was my mini rant. I think neurodivergent is like dumb as a term. I think we should stop
Fair
using
enough.
it. And yeah, that's all I got.
Okay, neurodivergent one, we will send you away. No, we like Testy here. Bring on the next call. Hello.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Hey.
What you got for us?
So first off, I really appreciate everything you've said thus far. I pretty much agree with everything, but I had a couple questions on what your take is on healthcare and insurances, or the insurance system's role in the mental health care crisis.
I believe in like mental health parity laws. So like psychiatric treatments have to be covered just like cancer treatments, for instance. And I believe like obviously expanding healthcare coverage as much as possible, right? So I haven't read about like healthcare economy in a long time, but I prefer a multi-payer model to a single payer model. Like I believe Germany has like the healthcare system that I want. But definitely like states that are like repeal the not states, politicians, mainly Republicans, that are like repeal the Affordable Care Act. What are we going to do to replace it? I don't fucking know. Like that's obviously a major problem. Like that's really bad. But I mean, the biggest thing is eliminating the IMD exclusion so that Medicaid can reimburse states for long-term care of psychiatric patients.
Right
Okay,
on.
I'm
Okay.
sorry about this. All these people saying, "Oh, she looks too young." Like, are you saying she looks too female to take seriously? That sounds like what you're saying. She looks too much like a woman. Why we can't listen to her? She looks too much
I'm
like a woman.
26, so I'm not too old, but I'm not.
Sure.
I'm 26. I have my own health insurance.
But it's interesting the criticisms being levied at you by some in chat that, oh, she just looks too young to take serious. Like these sound like code words for like, oh, she's a woman, so you know, fuck her, right?
What's your career?
I'm a law student, so no career. I have a job, but I'm not in a career yet.
Okay.
$5 from Parallax. Someone with ADHD is on the same spectrum as someone who is nonverbal and incapable of self-care. We've gone far beyond the pale. Thank you for the $5. Carry on.
I've got a follow-up to that.
Please.
So I heard you talking earlier about some sort of like anti-APA sentiment, or like I don't know how you would describe it, but like this phenomenon where the board doesn't necessarily move fast enough, or doesn't recognize things within its own community, or if you talk out against the consensus of the board, you get silenced. Like, can you speak to that a little bit more?
I mean, I don't know that it's like so malicious as like you will be silenced. You just will not progress in your career. Like if you criticize the direction that the DSM-5 went, you will not be invited. Well, we're on DSM-5 TR now, but it's basically the same thing as DSM-5. But like you will not be invited to participate in DSM-6. And participation in the DSM is like one of the like highest achievements that a psychiatrist can make, right? So like they all want to be a part of that. And there's also like this genuine belief that like they can do more to fix things if they don't cause too much trouble because they won't discredit themselves. So I don't think it's like the APA literally like, oh, how can we silence all dissent? There's just like clear incentives to not speak out.
Okay.
But you do have some that still do. Like the most notable examples are Alan Francis, who was the editor of the DSM-4, and a guy named Joel Paris, Dr. Joel Paris. He is a psychiatry professor at McGill, and he's the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry.
Oh, it's
so
Canadian?
He's another one.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't believe it anymore. I'm casting out Canadian. No, that's just a bridge too far. We can't go with this. No.
And
He's written a lot about diagnostic fads, and Alan Francis actually like went pretty hardcore on himself. He says like, I'm sorry guys, I accidentally contributed to 3 fake epidemics, and that would be the epidemic of ADHD, autism, and childhood bipolar disorder. Like Alan Francis has said that his own criteria that he signed off on, he was like, I just didn't expect it to be like misused the way it was.
We have professionals out in the field, out working in schools now, who are using basically like a false diagnosis and using treatment to treat, false labels. Then I work in behavioral health, so it's kind of like a relevant thing for me.
I mean, the like autism exists, right? Like nobody's saying
Absolutely.
Autism doesn't exist, but the argument is that there are kids that like previously would not have been diagnosed with autism, and like they won't benefit from therapies that are like evidence supported to deal with low functioning autism. So like a lot of autistic advocates, there are people with very high functioning autism, and they rail against ABA, which I think stands for applied. Yes. Yeah. So you're dealing out these treatments to people, and same thing with like quote unquote childhood bipolar disorder. Like there are children who look like they have a serious affective disorder, right? But like it just seems like whole ass antipsychotics are being given to children, and the risks outweigh the benefits. I don't know that any of the labels technically completely don't exist, but they've arguably been expanded so much as to be useless, and like more people are getting treatments that they don't need versus like people getting treatments that they do need.
So what do you think is like the best way to answer that? Is like more clinical definition of the labels?
Yeah, like at least stop inflating the labels, right? Like with the DSM-6, you shouldn't include any more people. You should arguably narrow them and like diagnose less people where less people would qualify for these labels. Yeah, I think the best solution is just to like move back. Like arguably we've already moved forward in like pathologizing normal, right? Like the name of Alan Francis's book was Saving Normal, and his whole argument is that normal shit has been psychopathologized. So I think rolling back on that is definitely beneficial.
Okay. Any other questions?
In the trans argument, where does this spectrum fall?
Oh no, I don't know if I don't know if this is applicable.
I know that's a deep one, but I don't know if you want to answer that. I can leave it there.
Well, okay, so I feel like there's the argument I've made. There's like an argument in the trans community that like perfectly mirrors it. There are people who have like debilitating gender dysphoria, and they're just in true like psychological anguish every single fucking day. And they have a very specific set of needs. And a person who identifies themselves as a trans person, but who does not have the same level of gender dysphoria, or like there are even people who use the term gender dysphoria just to refer to like general bad feelings, but that don't rise to the level of mental illness. And I mean, a lot of these people are like the non-binary types, right? And you'll have the quote-unquote binary trans people with like lifelong fucking intense, like life-threatening gender dysphoria. And they'll be like, man, these like really low symptom people are getting a lot of fucking attention. Like, please stop. Like, I basically think that this argument mirrors perfectly. And the people that say what I say, that say we should prioritize the most seriously mentally ill, like the most seriously suffering, they are called trans medicalists in the trans debate.
Okay. Okay. So, like, in a way, it kind of goes back down to like better clinical labeling.
Yeah, probably. I mean, well, there are people who deny that like being transgender is in any way related to a mental illness or a mental health disorder or whatever you call it. And then there are people who are like, no, I genuinely wouldn't identify myself as trans if I didn't have serious gender dysphoria. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. So there is like a fundamental disagreement, right? Like, yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Well, thanks for taking my questions. I appreciate it.
Thanks for calling in. Have a great day. Gang, if you have serious disagreements, a lot of you are acting up in chat, and please, like, challenge her. If she's wrong, if she's been lying to me this whole time, I need to know. But the only way I'm going to know isn't by you saying, nuh-uh, in chat. You have to come on, present your argument, and let's talk about it. Your nuh-uh in chat is not convincing. Allison has been very convincing to me today. She's presented evidence. She's presented arguments. She's presented rationality. You got to give me something more than nuh-uh. And this is open. Anyone can call in. !Discord. If you have substantive disagreements with her, that's fine. She might be wrong. But come on and tell us why. Please. I can't do anything about your nuh-uhs in chat. What am I supposed to do here? How am I supposed to handle that? Oh, Watasku, this is based. I think a lot of people would benefit from knowing her credentials more. How long did it take her to complete the VidMaster challenges? What's her gamer score? Has she platinumed a game before? That's fair. That's fair.
Can't say that I have.
That's fair. Okay. No video games for you? Then how do you know what mentally illness is if you've never video gamed, right? Only true gamers are the true mentally ill of the people. Kelly Jean sent me a DM. Hold on. Yeah, jump on in, Kelly Jean, if you have thoughts. Do you need an invite to the Discord? I sent you one. Just accept the rules. Jump backstage. It's the top of the thing. We'll pull you in. We'll talk to you if you'd like. But absolutely, right? It's one of those things where, like, I understand that these are contentious topics. I understand that there is a debate about this ongoing in the psychiatric community, also in the medical community, and in communities in general. And I would love to hear people who disagree with Allison here. But again, Allison has convinced me. Why is she wrong? Because she vapes? Well, that's fair. Vaping
that is fair.
No, okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. But, like, simply because she's a law student, again, deal with her arguments. I hate this. I hate this kind of way of thinking. Like, oh, what you're saying sounds like what a conservative would say, or sounds like what a TERF would say, or sounds like what a whatever would say. I don't care what I sound like, right? If the KKK suddenly started advocating for climate change stuff to be fixed, I wouldn't stop advocating for climate change stuff to be fixed just because they did, right? Well, good on them for being right for once, right? That's what we would say here. It's one of those things where she has said that AOT, is that the term you used?
Yes. Assisted outpatient treatment.
Evidentiary backing. She has presented that evidentiary backing to us. She has walked us through that evidentiary backing, and she has done so in a couple different ways from a couple different experiences with her own experience, as well as the experience of others, such as Kendrick's Law. Yeah. Do not have just jump backstage and then I'll pull you on. Kelly Jane, that's fine. But again, like, and I understand that she might be wrong. She might be incorrect, but I want to hear it. And maybe Kelly Jean will tell us. Kelly Jean, how's it going?
Hi, I actually missed half of the conversation, so I don't want to jump in and assume anything. But I did hear we should take the more serious mental illnesses first, right?
Yes.
Do we not do that? I mean, I'm British, so maybe my experiences are a little bit different. So I don't know.
In
if that has anything to do
America,
with it.
like our main government org that's like responsible for all this stuff is SAMHSA. And that I've been through it already, and I don't know if you heard it or not. I don't want to be redundant, but there's just SAMHSA has decided that its goal is to quote unquote promote the behavioral health of everyone. And other people would say, no, your job is to secure treatment for the serious and mentally ill. Like, that's your job. Like, that's where your money should be going. Like, stop funding like art therapy centers, okay, that anybody can get into. That's literally one thing that they funded. And like, there are countless examples of things that should be social service initiatives, like things to just generically like make communities better, that are nice and great. But like, should our mental illness funding be going to it? Like, probably not.
I see. So there are just people that have episodes of psychosis and they're not like the homeless, but they don't get treatment. Like I don't
Well,
understand.
so one of the things that we talked about in the beginning is how a lot of people will try to get into institutions that deal with the mentally ill, right? The serious
Sure.
mental illness, but they can't. There's no beds for them, right? It's super hard for those who want to get into a psych ward to get into a psych ward, primarily because there is no funding. There is no funding for this. And that funding that should be going to that, the argument would be, is instead going to art therapy centers. And so instead of funding the art therapy center, one should fund the psych wards where people who are desperate to get in there but cannot. And so instead of going there, they end up going to prison. They will, again, because again, we're not talking about mild autism or mild ADHD. We're talking about people who like hear the walls talking to them, right? Like who think that their neighbors are possessed by demons. They are being disruptive and getting killed and getting imprisoned, and that's just not helpful for them. So yeah.
The most
Weird.
vulnerable to violence from the seriously mentally ill, obviously it does happen to random members of the public, right? But the most vulnerable people are actually the person's own family, because these are oftentimes like the primary caregivers, are the ones around them. So it's super sad, but it's oftentimes the people who care the most for these individuals who are like the victims of their outbursts.
Is it really hard to get antipsychotics in the US? Or
Well, obviously, like if you're home, like if you're super poor and you don't know how to fill out the necessary government paperwork, like you don't have health insurance, right? Because you might qualify for Medicaid, but if you're too like out of your head to navigate the bureaucracy of that, like you're just not going to get covered. And I mean, my own medication, like for bipolar 1, literally, I mean, I pay $10 a month, right? Because I have good health insurance. But if I didn't pay, or if I didn't have health insurance, it would be $38,000 a year. That's how much my psych meds would cost. That's another thing too. Americans need to be allowed to import medications from countries where they are cheaper. That needs to happen. But yeah.
so this is sort of people that are in poverty and so ill that they can't get help. So this kind of is almost the homeless people or the people destined to become homeless or in jail, right? So they're sort of interconnected issues. I imagine that these programs that are talking about art and things like this are for people that already, I guess, have insurance and are already able to cover those things. Because from my point of view, it would be obvious that you just need both. Like, why get rid of the other one? Why not just put more funding into making sure that everyone gets treatment, I guess? I don't know. Unless it is literally a lack of funds. Maybe there is no more money. I don't know. America's weird.
America is
There-
weird, but go on, Allison, please answer.
There is there are people who will say we need funding. There is no funding. There's probably not enough funding, but there is a lot of funding that we just aren't taking advantage of because we're not directing them at the right sources. So like SAMHSA funding is the biggest example of that. So there was a senator who tried to make SAMHSA. They had this, it's called NREP, and it was disbanded by Trump, and everybody freaked out. But it was actually a good thing. It standed for something like evidence-based practices, and I shit you not, there wasn't a requirement that it be evidence-based. Like they called it evidence-based practices, and it just didn't have to be supported by evidence. And this guy, he was actually a representative, not a senator. His name was Tim Murphy, and he proposed a law that would have required any SAMHSA-funded program to show independent evidence that it improved meaningful metrics in seriously mentally ill people. And SAMHSA freaked the fuck out, and a lot of mental health lobbies freaked the fuck out. And they were like, did you know your program won't be eligible for funding if Murphy's Law passes? Like, we probably could use more funding, but step one is to just take advantage of the funding we have and direct it, like, adequately.
Do you know what percentage-wise SAMHSA takes from, like, funding overall for mental health services?
I have no idea. So most of SAMHSA's funding, like 2/3 of it, actually goes to substance abuse, and then only 1/3 of it is for mental illness. The CMHS, Center for Mental Health Services, is SAMHSA's mental illness branch, and then they have another substance abuse branch, and substance abuse actually gets the majority of the money. But I don't know any of the actual budgetary numbers off the top of my head. But I mean, they get like hundreds of millions of dollars. Like they do get a lot of money. It's just like, where is it going?
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. I don't know the answers to these questions either. I just sometimes think that people can get a bit too much like, oh, look, this money is being spent to this, but if it was spent on this, then we could do this. When realistically, there should be the funding to do anything that's helpful. And you might disagree that the efficacy of these programs, I haven't looked into them, so you could be entirely right. They're all garbage, or they're all like, what is more likely with mental health is it's quite difficult to prove the efficacy of anything to a point. But as long as it's not harmful, maybe it's not always a terrible thing.
I mean, if we were having money coming out of our ears, right? I'm with you, Kelly, right?
Well, I don't know what the percentage of the overall, like, for example, this could be like 2% we're talking about, and getting rid of SAMHSA wouldn't fix the issue necessarily, right? But it could be a huge chunk of the budget, in which case this is a much bigger problem.
Well, can I ask you, Allison? Allison might know this. Allison, other than SAMHSA, what other federal or state institutions are there that direct funding towards mental illness programs? Like, is SAMHSA it, or are there other things?
Each state has its own
good
thing.
Ones? Yeah.
I mean, each state has its own like mental health agency, and SAMHSA does distribute a lot of funds to these mental health agencies, but they direct them like conditionally. Like a certain amount of money has to go towards prevention, for instance, when like there's no reliable way to prevent serious mental illness. The best predictor of serious mental illness emerging is having an immediate family member with serious mental illness, but most people with a seriously mentally ill family member won't become seriously mentally ill themselves, and most seriously mentally ill people do not have a seriously mentally ill family member. So it's like it's the best predictor, but it's still not a great predictor, and it's sad, but there's just no reliable evidence that you can actually prevent psychosis from emerging. So like that's one example. Or like suicide prevention efforts that are targeted at the whole public versus the people most likely to actually commit suicide. So like the UK actually has a suicide prevention effort that was proven to work, and it was very different from what the US did. Like instead of going to people who have just been released from psychiatric wards, people who have committed or attempted suicide in the past, like those are the people most likely to die of suicide. But instead we put like a PSA on national television, and it costs like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And there's just never been any evidence to suggest that these like mass campaigns work for preventing suicide. Or like anti-stigma efforts is another thing that like a lot of money gets put into. And it's like, well, mentally ill people are only going to be so unstigmatized when there's so many like psychotic people on the streets. Like, you can see a PSA where an athlete tells you he has depression and you feel bad for him, but then you walk outside in a major US city and stumble upon an open air asylum, right? Like, the stigma is going to still be there. Like, the best way to reduce stigma is to get treatment for seriously mentally ill people, in my opinion. Like, have less stuff to stigmatize.
Yeah, and you said there's no real strong predictors to mental illness, but poverty is a strong predictor, right? You're like, it's quite
There's a strong
significantly more likely.
correlation. There's a strong correlation, but there's also a possibility that mentally ill people are more likely to end up impoverished because they can't like take care of themselves, or seriously mentally ill people at least.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be a causation, but
Yeah.
it's still indicative. So that would suggest that maybe putting more money into homeless programs, for example, might not sound like the most obvious way to help with mental illness, but could
Oh,
end
I mean,
up
like,
doing that.
I'm really in favor of just like throwing money at supported housing, right? I don't think that you can just like hole up all these people in one bedroom apartments. Like, isolation is very bad for these people, but just like throwing money into group homes that are well staffed and like actually decent places to live. Like, I think that's a huge thing that funding needs to be thrown at.
Yeah, agreed. So you said it's hundreds of millions of dollars. Is that across the United States, or is that per? How does that work? I assume it's across the United States, and then they get
Yeah.
to decide how much they want to spend per state. Is that how it works?
Yes. I'm actually about to look up SAMHSA's
Let's
like
see.
budget.
While she does that, I think that, like, I guess the question for me, and I don't know the answer to this, to be clear, there's a lot of people that seem to be suggesting that homelessness or social conditions will create mental illness that would not otherwise be there, and I don't know if I buy that. I'd have to see some evidence that that's the case. Though I intuitively understand that if you have a debilitating mental illness and are unable to function in society, that you are almost assuredly going to be in poverty. And I think that there's a cart horse situation being thrown around here, where we're putting.
Well,
Does
if
that
you're
make
in
sense, or-
poverty, you're under a lot more stress, and stress can have a significant number of negative effects on someone physically and mentally, especially when it's that level of extreme stress. And
It
if
can
we're talking
exacerbate, yeah, right. But I don't think it can create.
well, if we're talking about psychosis specifically, psychosis is not limited to mental illness, right? There's a number of physical illnesses that can cause psychosis, and drug use can cause psychosis. And what do homeless people use? Oh, sorry, my cat's jumping all over me.
It's all good. Maybe. What do you
What
think,
I will
Ellen? Go
say
ahead.
Like,
is
everyone
that-
knows about postpartum psychosis, right? It's this postpartum depression's more intense cousin. So, like, you don't have to have a mental illness to have a psychotic break. And
Well, I actually would say that
psychosis is
postpartum
serious.
psychosis is a mental illness. Like,
Well, it becomes, but there is a bunch of other things that can cause psychosis, right? There's drug use. There is other like physical illnesses that can cause a psychosis, and you
What are
would
these
say
other
having
physical-
pregnancy is a psychosis. You mean like what is the secondary causes of psychosis? They would be.
No, what?
Sorry,
what are
I need
these,
to let my cat out because
Oh,
now he's meowing.
let your
so I
cat
have to
out, but
be
I'm,
right
I'm
back.
really curious what these other conditions are, like these non-mental illness conditions that cause psychosis. I'm not
the
saying they're
only
not, but
example that I can
curious.
like readily think of, I'm not saying this is the only example, but I know that untreated syphilis people can descend into psychosis.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Also, SAMHSA for 2024 is seeking $10.8 billion. Now, 2/3 of that will go to substance abuse, but that's like the number we're talking about.
Fair enough. Wow, it sounds like a lot, but when it comes to the federal budget, that isn't a lot.
Sorry, I am back.
No,
My
it's
cat
fine.
was put in cat jail where he can't meow at me.
What's your cat's name?
Buddy. Yeah, he's interesting. But sorry,
That's
so we
so
were
cute.
talking about other things that can cause psychosis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
that-
not non-mental illness conditions. Allison mentioned syphilis. What else?
Okay, yeah, syphilis. Some autoimmune diseases can cause psychosis. Some endocrine and things that fuck with your hormones can cause psychosis.
There's a phenomenon. If you're a female and you go into a psych ward and you don't have like a history, even if you have a history of mental illness, they'll oftentimes still test you for this. But if you don't have a mental illness history and you turn up to a psych ward acting like seriously fucking insane, they will test you for a UTI, because UTIs can actually cause people to maybe not technically be psychotic, but to present as very severely acutely mentally ill.
Oh
when
yeah,
in
it's
fact they just have a
very,
UTI.
very painful to have a really bad UTI, but I am currently getting tested for Cushing's and a bunch of other things, and I'm aware that these things can cause psychosis. If you want to know what can cause secondary psychosis, is quite a list, and it's a little bit different from something that's like typically found with like a bipolar or schizophrenia. And the reason why it appears, sorry, not necessarily in its presentation. But there's like a lot of things that can cause psychosis. And you would need to make sure that the person that is presenting with psychosis isn't ill in some other way, which, you know, people who are homeless on the street have a much higher chance of being as well. And then there are things that, okay, they're mentally related, like Alzheimer's or like Parkinson's, dementia, and things that older people get, right? They can have psychosis type things, but it is mental, but it's not like a bipolar mental illness. So there are things, there's like a lot of things that can present this way. It's really important that you're checking like that the person actually just has a mental illness and not a physical illness as well. But also, I don't necessarily agree that psychosis is the only thing that we can say, oh, that makes a mental illness serious.
Oh, I don't think so either.
Yeah,
Like-
no, I didn't assume you did, but when I came in, it was psychosis was the only thing that was being mentioned. But as I say, I missed the first half of this conversation, so you guys might have gone over like a bunch of other stuff.
You listed some criteria for serious. It might help to repeat it. If I remember correctly, psychosis was one, but things that severely and debilitatively impacted your ability to work, ability to function in society, when you became violent, threats to others, etc. Rather than going on my imperfect memory, it might be helpful if you just relisted them.
It's basically when people say serious mental illness, they generally just mean a mental illness that is currently resulting in extreme functional impairment in at least one area of life. So psychotic people, almost certainly this applies to, right? Because it's very hard to function when you're psychotic. But there are also like anxiety disorders. Like I have known somebody with OCD that was like debilitating. Like it seriously fucked with his life in basically every single way. Like he had a hard time leaving the house. And he was never psychotic, and he was never even close to psychotic, but like he was definitely seriously mentally ill, and resources should have been directed at like his condition, right? So it really, I don't mean to be like exclusive. We should only care about people with bipolar type 1 and schizophrenia. Like that's really not what I mean. PTSD is another one that can be very, very, very severe and can like, I mean, basically render a person temporarily, if not permanently disabled. So
yeah, definitely.
Okay.
No, I agree. Yeah, just interesting. I think it can be difficult to know. And also like the goal is that whoever has a mental illness, right, that they get to that point where it is less serious, hopefully, that they're given the tools that and it can help them. But
Kelly, can I ask
I
you a
don't
question?
know, huh?
Can I
Yeah,
ask you a
sure.
question? I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm very curious. Because I asked this question to Allison, she had a very specific answer, very firm answer. I'm curious what your answer is. The way that mental illness is treated on social media, like things like Twitter, TikTok, talked about in these spaces, even. Do you think that's been on the net good or bad? Right? Is it a positive or a negative?
I do not spend any time in circles. Also, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that people who have different mental illnesses and their consequent, like their communities online are going to be quite different depending on what it is. So are there any particular mental illnesses you feel like are very prevalent on the internet and they're very misrepresentative?
We talked about TikTok ticks. Do you know what that is?
TikTok ticks? Is it something related to Tourette's? Or...
Yes.
It's basically like sociogenic, like quasi-Tourette's is like the allegation. But there is a phenomenon. It's been written about. Thank you. It's been written about by like medical professionals. An increase of teenage girls presenting with something that looks like Tourette's, but they have no history of Tourette's. And Tourette's is defined like as something that manifests in childhood. Like it's in the neurodevelopmental disorders category, which used to just be called like disorders diagnosed in childhood category. So like these teenage girls do not have what we would typically call Tourette's, but they look like it. And what do you know? They follow like TikTok, like Tourette's influencers, which is a literal category of people that actually exists. And they pick up these tics. And like there was even one, there's one
Wait,
British.
how are they finding this out? Are they doing investigative journalism into people going to doctors? I don't...
Well, like these girls will go in and then they'll get a therapist and then it comes out like, oh, I've been on TikTok and I follow this girl. It sounds hard to believe, but it really is like a phenomenon. And it's even been talked about like on Good Morning America and stuff. Like it's definitely, if you just Google TikTok ticks, it's going to come up. I'll try to find an example.
I mean, people pretending to have things that they don't have is not new.
I don't think this
So
is a
I
pretend
can
thing, though.
believe that. You don't think they're pretending?
No. I don't think they're pretending.
So
I think at least...
So what is it then?
That they actually, because again, they've been struggling what to call this, because they actually need therapy. They actually need help. It's just something that seems to manifest itself after a lot of exposure to these influencers and things like that. I
see. Well, I mean, people that have what is it, Munchausen's by proxy, the people that pretend to be ill or force people to be around them to be ill, technically they do have something wrong with them. It's just not the thing that they're faking that is wrong with them, right?
I think that there are probably some cases where people are like consciously faking, if not like highly exaggerating symptoms for the attention of that. And like Munchausen's, which they now just call fictitious disorder. Okay, there's literally a mental illness where you fake mental illnesses. Okay, but fictitious disorder, they do that to assume the sick role, right? Or if it's Munchausen's by proxy, fictitious disorder by proxy, they do that to assume the role of a caregiver of a sick person, right? Because they enjoy the social clout of that. I definitely think there is that is a component, but I also do believe in like sociogenic illness, which is like just a way to say social contagion, like, or hysteria. Like another thing is like the quote unquote DID TikToks. They get accused of faking it a lot. And I do believe that there are some people that are consciously choosing to fake it. But I also do believe that there are people who genuinely believe that these symptoms are arising, right? Like they are not thinking that they are faking it, but it's just the explanation is not what they think it is.
Yeah, sure. Like big groups of people all mistakenly believing there's something wrong with them. Like, yeah, that's a pretty old thing that I think has been happening for a long time. It's very strange to see it. And now that we have access to online, we get to see it in real time happening, I guess. And I guess
it used to be clustered in communities, like these like social contagions. It used to be clustered in geographic areas, but now online, it's like clustered in online communities, right?
So the concern is, like, how do you manage that or mitigate the issues surrounding that? Good question. I don't know. Because you would have to determine people that are susceptible to that, right? And fuck knows how you're going to do that.
Yeah, who knows indeed. Okay, gang.
Easily influenced people, I'm not sure.
Okay, gang, if you're enjoying this content, hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Throw me some bits, throw me some subs, throw me some super chats. All great. We have one more person to bring on. We'll let you stay, Kelly, because I value your input. We'll see what this guy has to say. What you got? You are live. Your time to shine.
He's asleep.
Left him waiting too long. It's possible. Brother, wake up! You're here. The spotlight's on you.
I deeply apologize. I have some technical issues. I think you might remember me, Vic, from the Turkey Tom call-in.
Know who you are. Go on.
So I'm here because I think I can. Wait, can I just share the link to my friends so they can also watch? Because being on this
Yes, you
stream
can
of such
share
a
the
big
link to my
celebrity,
stream. Go for it. Yeah.
No,
it's
no
like,
promoting Wick.
Yeah.
listen, I love Vic. Don't you dare insult Vic in my presence. I love this man. I'd die for you, Vic. Like if somebody told me,
I'm not
we're gonna
asking
kill Vic,
anyone to
I'd be
die for
like,
me, please.
listen. If Vic has 1 million fans, I'm one of them. If Vic has one fan, I'm one of them. I'm that one. If Vic has no fans, that means I'm no longer on this earth. That's how we roll, Vic. That's how we roll.
Okay,
Give it
well,
high
thank
five.
you for this.
I think.
But go on, please.
So listen. First of all, I have some comments on like mental illnesses and stuff. I like to offer far right perspective on it because it's I think not very common to hear the far right perspective of anything because lack of free speech. But first of all, uh, I'd like to ask our guest Alison. I think you have very interesting racial features. Could you tell me what's your ethnic background?
Well,
What?
allegedly, half of my family is completely German, and then allegedly half of my family is like Irish, English, mutt people. But I haven't seen the genetic test, so that might just be family lore.
But see, similar to Turkey Tom, your eye is also kind of Asian. What's going on there?
I get that a lot.
Wait, hold on. How is this relevant to the discussion
It
we're
is
having?
relevant. It is relevant. I mean, actually, it's not really. But I'm just trying to make small, kind of
Trying to
my
make
thing.
people
But
more comfortable
um,
by asking him, "Hey, what race you are?"
Icebreaker.
like, see, I don't need to ask you because I can immediately tell. You're an open book. But that's a good thing. Anyhow, listen. I like to say from my experience, I think there is too much psychoanalysis in politics. Like, for example, right? I'm a national socialist, but one problem that I kind of came across is that um, a lot of people would dismiss radical views by not saying you are incorrect for this and this and that. They would just dismiss you as a lunatic. I think this is kind of death of politics and more of total domination of like psychology in terms of everything. Like philosophy is being replaced by psychology, sociology is being replaced by psychology, politics is being replaced by psychology. Today, politics isn't disagreements of two different
What?
views. It's people who are declared sane by the regime against those who rebel, and those who rebel are declared to be insane, right? Like nobody's gonna be like, oh, you're a Nazi, and that's like wrong for this and this. No, you're a Nazi because you're mentally ill or something. That's a phenomenon I have been observing
Okay.
for a very long period of time.
Oh, I wanna hear Allison's and Kelly's thoughts on this because I am confused.
What
Please.
was the
I mean,
question in that?
Let him cook. Okay, let him cook. Go ahead, cook.
Women cook. That you're so right, Vic. So based.
But what is the question? That was
Well, there
just
is
a
no question. I
very
made the
rambly
observation that there is-
statement.
Yeah, it's a statement.
So we have no politics now or philosophy.
Yeah,
it's
I think
only psychology. What?
Yeah, kind of, because like people today, like I'm giving you my personal example, right? Like nobody's gonna be like, oh, because you're Nazi, you're wrong on these political issues. They're gonna be like, oh, you're a Nazi because you're mentally insane or something. Like, I think, are you familiar with sociologist Michael Foucault?
Sure.
See, he spoke about it as well. Like politics are dying and they are being replaced by basically those who are for like establishment, and those people are declared sane, and only those who rebel can be declared insane. And therefore, anything they believe in can be dismissed as ramblings of madmen. Why engage in politics if your opponents are mad people? Why listen to them? Just lock them up.
Yes, but neither of our countries has a Nazi party running at the moment, so I'm not sure what the fuck
I mean,
we're
I'm just
talking about.
giving an example. I'm just giving an example of like variety of those who are against the system in radical fashion, rather than from far left to far right. Anyhow, those people are declared as crazy. And it's not that radicals, like in general, any political opponent, right? They're not addressed by their politics. They are addressed as, oh, these Trump supporters, they support Trump because their penis is small and they have erectile dysfunction. No, it's not addressing socio-economical issues or philosophy or these things. It's pure like psychological.
I understand that this happens, that there are a lot of people who will dismiss the other side as crazy. I'm not disagreeing with you there. That happens all the time. I think it's lazy. I think it's a poor way to engage in conversation and things like that, and it doesn't serve your cause. But there are plenty of people who take issues with the roots of these political issues, these political parties, Nazism, for example. We can attack their philosophy, right? And we can disagree with their philosophy on the merits. We could also disagree with the philosophy of Trump on the merits and his policies on the merits. And we can measure, like, for example, his economic policies, right? And we can see and measure how they did and what effects they had. And then we can either say, well, this was good or this was bad. And so I understand where a lot of people would say, oh, you support Trump? You're crazy. That's not what I do. I say, oh, you support Trump? Tell me why. And then we deal with those reasons why.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Being crazy is
I
not.
would just like to say something here.
Well,
of course, Vic, you are 100%.
Well,
I was going to respond to Vic.
Just real quick, let Kelly speak a little bit, and then yeah, go ahead.
Being crazy is not a new concept, so why would it just be taking over like every other aspect of the things you just mentioned? Why would now psychology be more important than politics and sociology? Like I don't know what like people have been crazy since the dawn of time. Like what does that mean?
Yeah, but there is a difference here, right? First of all, that kind of ties to what you said, Vic. Of course, Vic, you would never do that because you're an honest person with integrity, and I respect you a lot for that, right? For even having me on. But the thing is, I'm not talking about, streamers. I'm talking here from institutional point of view, how politics are conducted on institutional level. And there we see this example. And you are wrong, Kelly Jean, precisely because before in history, madmen haven't been attached to like political discussions because political discussions have been done in different manners of forms. I really can get into because now that will be history lecture. But only recently, with the rise of psychoanalysis and the generally like this whole clique of like psychiatry, right? It's getting crazy out there precisely because they are destroying other factors of how to analyze society and dismissing it everything to just purely psychological biological determinism. Like as they say, Prozac, not Plato, right? That's horrible, but that's what's happening.
I'm sorry, why am I wrong? Because of what?
Well, first of all, you are a woman, therefore you're kind of ontologically wrong.
Come on. No, none of that.
Oh no, okay, Vic, I understand.
See,
okay,
again, much like you would say, hey, just calling me crazy doesn't deal with my arguments. Calling her a woman doesn't deal with her arguments. Deal with her arguments.
I was kind of doing a joke there for the homeboys.
A joke, also, ha ha ha.
Yeah. Also, Kelly Jean, one of my friends would be willing to date you. So if you're interested, DM me. Anyhow,
no.
To pass this topic. Now listen. I'm listening.
You didn't explain why I am wrong, other than I am woman. Do you want to like maybe try again?
Actually, I told you before because historically, right? People
historically
who are insane,
what?
Historically, our attitude towards insanity has been radically different than what has been done today. So political opposition, religious opposition.
We had several monarchs in England that were fucking insane. Like, what are you talking about?
Name one.
Oh, fucking... I can name more than one. You'll have to give me a second to fucking Google them.
Let's talk about the history of England. Do you know who Alfred the Great was? Do you know who
that is? Yeah, I know who Alfred the Great is, but you're talking like 1,000-odd years ago.
Yeah,
I can.
That's just.
To try to bridge a gap.
Henry VIII did have. He had gout and probably syphilis, and syphilis can make you insane.
Alfred
yes,
the Great?
but no. They said Henry VIII in the chat. I don't know truly how insane he was, but he was.
No, how was he
not
insane?
great by the end.
How was he insane?
If you keep talking over me, I can't fucking hear nothing.
I just said, how was he insane?
I'm responding to people in the chat. That's what I would have said if you would have let me actually speak and not speak over me. But he did
Wow,
have.
I'm really mansplaining it.
Yeah, okay, enough. Kelly,
That's
go
not
ahead.
mansplaining. That's just talking over me.
Go ahead, Kelly,
Like
please.
you can't
Really?
hear what I'm
Also,
saying,
if
and I
both of
can't
you
hear
have
what you're
cameras, turn them
saying.
I
on,
can hear you
please.
loud and clear.
Stop. If you have cameras, turn them on. That'd be great. But right, if you don't, I get that too.
I can't because of my politics. There are a lot of people out there, not on the left, but on the right, who would gladly dox me. I have enemies, Vic. You might be surprised because, I come across as a very pleasant and friendly person, but I have enemies. And those enemies, they're out to get me.
Noted. Kelly.
Oh, okay. So we had a semi-recent monarch that was mentally ill. I know that because they
That's
were
not really addressing
featured
my
in a...
point.
Let Kelly.
Kelly
Well,
Jane.
let
That's not
Kelly
really
get
addressing
there.
my
If you
point.
let Kelly speak, she'll get there. Kelly, go ahead.
I know that he had a mental decline, and I'm just trying to remember which one. He was... they featured it in Bridgerton, so I'd have to double check. But we have like... This is not like new. Is it George III? That sounds
Yes,
right.
I know who you're talking about. the Mad King George III.
Right,
playing the
okay,
baseball
so
player.
like this idea that mad people have never existed, and especially since
I never
like,
said that.
then what
I
are
never
you
said that.
saying?
Okay, I have to repeat myself. Okay, do you want me to talk slower?
You saying they
My
do?
point is we treated the insane in the past has been radically different than how we introduced insanity to politics. Before politics, theology, those two things were different than insanity.
Different
If
how?
somebody
You're gonna have to
different that
explain these
like
things and just say
for example,
things.
right, like when Catholics ruled England, right, they weren't like, oh, Protestants are just insane people. No, they would address them theologically. They would say you are theologically heretic, right? They wouldn't call them, oh, you're just loony Protestants.
They
right?
would kill
That's
them, to be
different
clear.
approach.
They would like burn them at the stake
but
and crucify
of
them.
course,
And
but that's execution. Yeah, but that's like execution of the justification, and justification wasn't on the grounds of insanity; it was on the grounds of heretical theology. However, today you don't have that on institutional level, because on institutional level, right, they don't address you as a political subject, they address you as a mental subject, right? So if you oppose, if I, for example, oppose all of the, Africans and Asians in England, if I was English, you wouldn't be labeled as a political opponent, you would be labeled as mentally insane by the institutions, and similar cases anywhere in the first world. And do you know where we see it as well? We see it first in the Soviet Union. Do you know how Soviet Union dealt with their dissidents after Stalin? They were all declared insane. None of them were taken politically as they were never taken as political subjects. They were taken as just insane people. That's why you see skyrocket amount of political dissidents in the Soviet Union, being sent to loony bins.
Can we bring this back to how this relates to the discussion today about mental illness in America? Can we
I
think I can do it.
Is.
Allison, try.
Okay. I can't sign on to the whole, like, we don't have sociology, we don't have politics or philosophy anymore, okay? Can't go that far. But there is, like, an effort by some people to psychopathologize extreme political and religious views. It is true that people with serious mental illness are more likely to be, radicalized either politically or religiously, but most people who have been religiously or politically radicalized are not dealing with mental illness. So I've literally seen people like talk about Trump voters as if they have delusions of persecution, which is a term typically referred to like a belief that someone is trying to kill you, or like a belief that someone is like out to get you, right? And they will say that like Trump people have this delusion of persecution, that everybody's coming to get them. And I do think it's lazy. I do think you can argue with their politics without implying that they're suffering from a serious mental illness, right? Because maybe they are, but probably they're not. And so yeah.
Also, to add to further to this topic about actually mentally insane, why don't we just put them in camps? Why should I pay welfare?
Woolen, thank you.
Is
thank
camps
you for coming
the
on.
right word? Jesus
Can I
Christ.
come on the next show? Can I just ask? Can I come on the next show?
I don't know about the next show. DM me. I'll see you later.
I don't know if he needs to be on the next show.
I don't know if he needs to be on the next show either. I'm gonna be real with you. Okay, great,
I
wonderful.
wonder if he was talking about the people he was That just melted my brain. I don't know what the point of anything he was saying was.
Skilltree Dollar Gaming for $5 asks, why does the U.S. have much more mental illness than other countries? I don't know if that's true.
I honestly don't know either.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's an accurate statistic. I'm not beating the fascist enabler allegations with fans like that. But hey, you know, it is what it is.
Like, propaganda against the mentally ill and it being used politically is like not a new thing, and I'm really just confused as to why he thinks that. So I'm just, what?
Yeah, there is
I don't know.
It's
I'm
not
so
new.
confused.
It's not new, but it is bad when it's done, right? I think we could all agree.
Sure, but it's just an extension of insulting your opponent,
Sure,
isn't it,
yeah.
really? Which no one should really do, but it is what it is, and that's happened since the dawn of time, so I don't know.
True. Okay, any more callers before we shut this shit down? And before I go mentally ill, right? I don't want any of the infections from the women.
Wait. It's really important. What's your racial background?
I don't know.
I'm kidding.
I don't know. I should have asked him because I know exactly what you are. What does that mean?
I feel like if someone comes in saying that should just be an auto kick. Like, what is the point?
I was wondering. I'm gonna be real with you. I was curious where I was going with it. I wanted to see. I was very curious what that had to do with anything. But yeah. So
I enjoy the variety. I like the variety. Variety's the spice of life, you know.
Okay.
Silver lining, maybe.
Okay.
Weird. Sorry, did I hear you say earlier you have bipolar?
Yes, yeah, I've been diagnosed with it.
Is type 1 or 2?
1.
Oh, okay. My dad's wife has bipolar 1. She is the worst person I've ever met, but
many such cases.
Yeah, I don't really think she's medicated for it though, so, you know.
Even more such cases.
Yeah, alas.
No, I mean, one of the like sad facts about like not prioritizing the seriously mentally ill over people is like I think a big reason why that happens is because a lot of times seriously mentally ill people are less sympathetic. Like, at least they come off as less sympathetic. Like, there are I mean, yeah, like they can be very, very difficult to be around sometimes. So obviously, like, I've been diagnosed with bipolar type 1. I don't want like the illness to be super stigmatized or whatever, but we've got to be real. Like, when a person is untreated, like they are a difficulty. So.
Yeah. Did you get diagnosed pretty early on?
I was 21, so.
Oh, how comes it took them so long?
I mean, I had been diagnosed with major depression before,
okay.
but I hadn't had a manic episode yet. So I actually wasn't even thinking about bipolar at the time. That's another, okay, not to get off on a completely different tangent, but there's this weird problem for some people, and I get it, but for a lot of seriously mentally ill people, it's not relatable. Trying to get diagnosed and not being able to. It's hard to relate. If you're acutely psychotic, they will find you and they will diagnose you with a mental illness whether you want them to or not. So the struggle of I know I have this mental illness and I just can't get a doctor to tell me. I get how that could be hard for certain people, but I don't know. It is kind of hard to relate to sometimes.
Maybe it's to do with what I've noticed with psychiatrists, and maybe doctors even broadly in general. If you go in saying, I have X, they tend to be more reluctant to just assume that you're telling the truth for one reason or another. And I've said this to friends when they're aware of what might be wrong with them. I'm like, you need to go in and talk about symptoms. You don't go to the doctors and tell them what you think you have. And then you need to just consider what they tell you and try that first, because it might be different from the thing that you think you have, right? Obviously, this is going to be a bit variable. But like, for example, like bipolar is not the only thing that has psychosis. So if you went to the psychiatrist with psychotic symptoms and said, I have bipolar, they would be like, well, hang on a second. We need to like go back about 8 steps and like figure something out first, right? Because like when I did not go in for an ADHD diagnosis, and that is probably why I got one, I went in for like trauma and PTSD, and I wasn't expecting to come out with an ADHD diagnosis like 6 months later. Whereas a lot of friends have been struggling to get the diagnosis that they think they've had for years at this point. So I don't know.
Okay.
I also think you really should be open to the idea that what you think you have isn't the right thing.
I agree. I agree. I think that
so,
it becomes hard. Like, there's a reason, right? We have the saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. And there's also a reason when someone's too close to something, it makes it hard to take them as an objective observer. And so if you especially are suffering from these conditions, again, the chances of you misdiagnosing yourself are quite high, especially when you have no expertise, no experience, no training, if you will, on this. And again, here's where I think that social media fails us, right? There's a lot of people like, oh, you may be autistic if you have this X, Y, or Z thing. And people start to believe that shit if you tell them enough. And it's really important that if you have certain symptoms, that you get diagnosed properly, because some symptoms, like you could have the same symptoms and one of the results of those symptoms is something very mild, but another possibility is very, very serious, and these two conditions would have to be treated in very, very different ways. And so again, go on, Allison, please.
One example of that is like bipolar type 2. A lot of people that have bipolar type 2, it takes them a long time to get diagnosed because they don't view their so bipolar type 1 is like OG manic depression. You have manic episodes and you have depressive episodes. Bipolar type 2, you have hypomanic episodes, which are generally not debilitating, but it's like a noticeable upswing in energy. And you have at least major depression, right? So a lot of these people, they don't report their hypomanic symptoms because they see it as like a relief from their depression, like a temporary relief. It doesn't feel like a psychiatric symptom. They don't report it. They get diagnosed with unipolar depression instead of like bipolar disorder type 2, and antidepressants straight up do not work for them like the same way. Like the pharmacologic treatment for bipolar type 2 is very different from the pharmacologic treatment for unipolar depression. So I do get where the wrong diagnosis can like fuck you up, right? Because treatment straight up won't work. But that's not like a person knows that they have bipolar 2 and they go inside and they just can't get somebody to tell them, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, so I wasn't necessarily thinking of bipolar, though that happens. It's whatever it is, and some things just do become more popular. It's strange. ADHD is one of them, but it's like this, it rotates. Like what people think they might have right now, whether it's a personality disorder or a mental illness, or a neurodevelopmental disorder or whatever. There is a lot of overlap between a lot of these illnesses, and if you do not spend the time like having multiple sessions and really digging into, if you're an adult, digging into your like your school records and things like that, getting statements from family, like honest statements from people in your life, not just what you want them to put down and to tell the doctors. Because when you're an adult, it can be very easy to even accidentally influence the outcome of these things, and you're just delaying the help that you really want to get by just sort of obfuscating things. I've seen a lot of people do this, and then they end up surprised that they're not getting the ADHD meds that they want, and it's just, I'm like, well, what did you expect, really? And I'm not saying there's no worth in self-diagnosis. This is more of a middle ground opinion, in my opinion, where it's like
Ventress, Fensitter,
yeah,
okay.
it is, but
Welcome.
I do think that way. I think that and I'm not going to say that doctors don't ever get it wrong, because they do, but they're usually quite honest about it being a process. I've been misdiagnosed from physical ailments. Like, it's not unique to psychiatry. These things they take a little bit of time to get there.
Okay. Well, this has been a wonderful talk, wonderful discussion. Hey, thanks for jumping in, Kelly. I haven't seen you in a while. I'm glad to have you back.
Yeah, no
on the show.
worries. It was interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sad I missed the first part, because, yeah.
It's okay. It's recorded. You can go check that out too.
True.
Gang, what do we have coming up? So first of all, it's a weekend, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Monday, we're going to be having a, I'm not even sure how to pitch this to you guys, but you guys are all familiar with the President's Sunday leaks and things like that.
I have a suggestion. Oh, I'll DM it to you. I'll DM it to you.
Yeah, DM it to me. Let me talk. Let me talk my shit real quick. Please. A lot of the people who were victims of the leak, of the privacy violation, have really wanted a chance to be heard, right? They don't feel that they've had a chance to kind of tell their side or be heard. So it's an open invitation to them, to Jenny Matrix, Olive Oath, Cactus, and a few others. Anyone who has been impacted by this negatively, please, Monday, that's what we're going to do. Wednesday, we're going to have a discussion on privacy rights and the importance of privacy, and just to what extent we should have privacy on the internet. That should be an interesting discussion too. Anything else from either of you before I...
Wait, what is this? Did somebody's stuff get leaked?
Are you not familiar with...
I'm out of the loop. I'm sorry.
Okay, no. So, very briefly, President Sunday got a hold of the private group chat messages of Brianna Wu and a bunch of other trans individuals that were in a group chat.
Oh, was this just like the silly sort of catty?
Yes, and they are blowing it up as if it's a trans genocide, right?
And why would you ever give stuff to President Sunday? That's a low point in your life.
I don't know. Yeah, the person, the Judas who violated everyone.
Do they know?
Sunday, I don't know.
Do they know who that was?
I'm not sure. I haven't talked to them. But yeah, it was gross what he did in the privacy violation, and I think that they deserve a chance to talk about it, because we let victims talk on this channel, right? Like we let them tell their story, and we let them see what they got to go through. But yeah, that's what's going on with that. Should be fun, should be interesting. Until then, though, gang, I am going to be doing other things on my weekend, so please don't bother me. But I love you anyway. So we're going to rate out. Who are we going to? Where are we going? Suggestions? Lord them out.
Who's streaming?
We got Corey Campbell. We got Ranger Rogue. We got Lumi Roo. We got Nicole Belafonte. We got Shark Zero. We got Gutnot. We got I'm Really Important. We got Nina.
I think Corey Campbell's a little sweetheart.
Okay, Corey Campbell it is.
I'm curious, Allison. Do you take an antipsychotic?
I do.
What milligram do you take?
Oh, before we get into the, let me rate out before we get into the private call. I don't want you to.
I mean, well, if it's private for her.
Yeah, I don't know if it is.
I don't know.
I want to let her know that we haven't rated out just quite yet, but yeah. Okay, go ahead. I'm just rating out on what's it called as well. So.
Okay, so basically, I had massive problems with antipsychotics, like enormously. But now I'm on Vraylar, which is like the newest one to come out, and it's an extremely low dose. Like I take 3 milligrams when I'm more acute and 1.5